Testing, testing.
Testing 1, 2 for captions. Testing 1, 2 for captions. And you heard me on the Zoom. Awesome. You said noon today. Okay, cool. Oh, man, I'm gonna have like a full day in the office today, and I'm always like, it's water boards. I never know. And it's not like I could look at your agenda, 'cause your agenda could be 1 or 2 items, and it's like, oh, we're going 12 hours. They're 6 hours each. Like, good to go then? I don't know why those aren't on. Wait, you put up these chairs?
Over half of them.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to go and tell them, because, yeah.
I was like, I swear I put a chair there.
No, you did. I took a turn on the monitors.
Oh. Oh. No, but he. No, I give it time out.
Okay, I think we can be good. You tested the audio there, tested the audio there. Let me just go on the bathroom. Grabbing a break after that.
My in public comments, yes,
Yes.
thank you. Yes, I know, famous last words. Yeah, yeah, you never say that. I'm sorry. Don't hate me.
I'm good, how many changes there are for the IEP item.
Well, it's money. I guess.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, gee whiz. I talked to Joaquin about gadflies. Because when I worked for the LA Times, I used to cover city councils. And every city council has someone like that. It's like a hobby or something, and there's just no avoiding it.
No.
There's nothing you can do in the end. But the sad part is some of them are truly dangerous. They're semi-stalkers. But yeah, most of the time they're just well-meaning people with not enough to do. So, yeah. And with just enough knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, little thing.
Thank you. You finished my sentence.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, August 19th. It is 9:05 a.m., and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm being joined this morning by Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Nicole Morgan, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Sean McGuire. We're also joined by our two Chief Deputies, Karen Mogus and Eric Ekdahl, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer. Our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her this morning is Elizabeth Carrillo and Susan Reyes. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting with both virtual and in-person components. If you're joining us virtually, you should be tuning in to our customary webcast on the Cal EPA website or the YouTube Live website. But if you intend on commenting on today's item, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There is a link and instructions on how to get onto the platform at the top of today's agenda. If you're having any challenges, though, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you on the platform. Once you are on the platform, your camera will be off. You will be on mute until it's your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone here in the room, good morning. Good to see everyone. We're here in Sacramento in the California Environmental Protection Agency building. A few quick announcements for us as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await some further direction. Also, if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to sign up. There is a QR code at the side of the room, also a laptop. If you're having any challenges, please do just speak to the clerk of the board and she can help get you signed on. Once you're at the podium, please introduce yourself and any affiliation if you feel comfortable. And lastly, please do silence phones just so we have an uninterrupted discussion this morning. With that, we can move, as we customarily do, to public forum. I believe we have, about 6 public forum commenters this morning. Begin first with Bob Gore, be followed by Jeff Ellsworth, and then Ray Tahir. That should be live for you now.
It is. I'm so sorry. Courtney's written a note that says no need to press because the first thing you want to do is. And anyway, sorry.
We're in the modern era now.
Dragged in with resisting. My name is Bob Gorham from the Gualco Group, and funding is fraught. And to invent a word, it's about to get fraughter. You understand what I mean? We have a record level deficit. We have a lot of fund shifts. There's only going to be more of them. Prop 4 is about to emerge. GGRF is being reconciled. That's almost $8 billion. And the fund shifts alone already amount to more than $300 million, all of which needs to be managed. There's the federal funding cuts. This all needs to be reconciled and discussed. And Water World needs the Water Board as the leading deliberative body to perhaps steward this discussion, to inventory the funding, prioritize projects, particularly drinking water and DACs in the Central Valley, fund those priority projects. And then here's where it can get creative. On an ongoing basis, do things like regulatory reconciliation. You know, you've got all these funding pots, hundreds of them, with conflicting regulations and rules. They could be reconciled. Multiply the money, reduce the friction, reduce the administrative expense by continuously coordinating on a creative level. We've seen it done. And Waterworld's leading deliberative body has Waterworld's leading customer service agency, the Department of Financial, Division of Financial Assistance. They're beyond excellent. And then, in addition to reconciling all the regulatory pots, you can leverage your unique vehicle of low interest. That can be multiplied financially, but only with coordination. And I know our friends at CNRA, CDFW, the whole alphabet soup, the feds, the conservancies, CV Salts, could come to this table as funders and multiply all this. Now, yes, it's already being done. Yes, it's happening. But you know, even internally, not everyone knows. And the situation changes. And here's an illustration of the need. This is an old man story, but it gets to the point. Karen Ross looked at Craig McNamara and I more than 10 years ago and said, feed hungry people. So we formed a pro bono group that's purposely pro bono, the California Food Waste Roundtable. regulatory agencies, nonprofits, we all get together quarterly and figure out how to multiply food distributions and reduce food waste. We've been very successful. Everybody already knows pretty much what's going on, but the coordination is necessary. And here's two things that happen. And here's two things that will happen if the water board does coordinate funding. You get people in a room and they look around and you'll hear it. And it makes you so happy, because I hear it at the Food Waste Roundtable. You'll hear someone say, I didn't know that, even though they've been in the business for 25 years. And then you start talking, and then you get creative, and then you share knowledge. And then you can actually do things that you never thought of because you have shared knowledge. And one other thing that happens, you get new friends. Because the other thing you hear in meetings like this is, collaboratories, is, you know, I've been around for 10 years, I've never met you. This is great. And then the meeting adjourns and you see them in a corner talking, having ideas, sharing things. And yeah, I know Waterworld's already doing all this, but we really need to get together and coordinate the funding, mainly for 700,000 people who need drinking water. But there's a lot of others too. And thanks for listening.
I really appreciate those thoughts and words and encouragement here, Mr. Gore. As I think you've probably heard, we have been doing our best to track what is shifting landscape, certainly on the budget side, both on the state and federal level. And to your point, need to continue to just articulate, one, the importance of those funds, but how we continue to, improve how we get those out. To your point, there is a lot of coordination I know that goes on, I just take for as a slice the CV salts discussion and drinking water. We're really trying our best to make sure we are maximizing what are sometimes disparate pots or pots that are coming from different places. So yeah, look forward to and always are open to an opportunity to better articulate what's going on. I think sometimes, to your point, folks don't necessarily realize that the state board is actually an infrastructure agency in many ways. And since 2019, we've invested over $12 billion in the state through these programs. And so, very mindful of their importance and, to your point, our ability to make sure we keep doing the best with the dollars that we have. So I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, next I would like to call up Jeff Ellsworth, who'll be followed by Ray Tahir, then Gary Mulcahy and Walter Lamb.
Thank
Mr.
you. Is my
Ellsworth,
audio?
good morning.
Is my
Yeah,
audio?
we can hear you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chair Esquivel, board and staff. Thank you for the time for me to read these comments and for the work you do. I want to present, my name is Jeff Ellsworth. I'm the former mayor of a small town, St. Helena in Napa County, and now a member of California LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens, and the California LULAC Napa Valley Waste Workers Advisory Committee. I want to read this morning comments that I also presented to the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board last week, to that board and their chair, Strauss Hacker, the chair there. And what I said was, as I've spoken to here before, there are significant concerns with long-term impacts and lack of accountability to the primarily Latino workforce at Upper Valley Disposal Service Clover Flat Landfill in Napa County, including significant exposure to the toxic wastewater that is in your purview, as well as fires, unregulated radioactive waste, and a Latino worker fatality. And that occurred in 2013, but as we looked at it, it was never fully investigated. Now, I've just returned from the LULAC National Conference in Southern California, summer of 2025, where a national level LULAC resolution was adopted addressing this matter of impacts to Latino waste workers, including reference to additional Latino waste worker deaths in the San Francisco Bay Area since just the beginning of this year at other waste companies in the jurisdiction of the San Francisco Bay Area Regional Water Board. These recent deaths of Latino workers occurred at Recology in Brisbane and at the Alco scrap metal facility in San Leandro, both in the jurisdiction of the San Francisco Bay Area Regional Water Board, clearly indicating a systemic problem. I will provide the LULAC national level resolution as it is finalized. Our California LULAC Waste Worker Advisory Committee has met on this issue as well with the California Department of Labor and Office of California Assembly Member Liz Ortega of the 20th District that includes San Leandro, and who has raised significant concerns regarding a breakdown of oversight on these matters. We'll also be reaching out to the Assembly representative from the 21st District representing Brisbane, and we are hearing from more Latino workers who point to systemic problems in reporting water and environmental contamination, workplace safety concerns, and civil rights concerns. These comments are also being provided to leadership at LULAC, California, and national levels, as well as to all relevant state agencies. The tragic deaths and the mistreatment of these Latino waste workers, including at Upper Valley Disposal Service, Clover Flat Landfill in Napa County, highlight a larger environmental problem when waste workers are untrained, fearful, or unable to register complaints over mismanagement of toxic and contaminated materials and fire-prone waste that can escape into the broader environment and public waterways that are the purview of the Water Board. In light of ongoing national events, the commitment to racial equity and protection of civil rights is up to all of us and each of us on a day-to-day basis, on a board level, a staff level, and a personal level. It's all of our responsibility. The Water Board Racial Equity Action Plan, combined with current state and federal laws, as well as Water Board Resolution 2021-0050, can be implemented towards addressing these systemic breakdowns. Again, and finally, I'll ask that this matter be agendized by this board and staff in hearings with sworn testimony at the soonest possible juncture, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for yours as well, Mr. Ellsworth. Appreciate the update on your ongoing work here in the community, and it is really appreciated, so thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Ray Tahir, be followed by Gary Mulcahy, then Walter Lamb, and I believe and Mr. Lamb, I believe, will be our last commenter this morning.
Next slide, please. Good morning, board members. Next slide, please.
Good morning, Mr. Tahir. Apologies, I think you may have an echo on your side. You may have a couple of windows open or a second mic.
Start now.
Okay, but you're good now, though. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Contrary to what Chair Esquivel said, public forum is not an opportunity, it is a right. He also said that my comments were not productive and would hate to see adjustments made to public forum because of its abuse, obviously directed to me. Sounds like a threat to ban me from public forum, is it? Please respond and be mindful of the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act I told you to read at the last meeting. It is a public policy of this state that public agencies exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business, and the proceedings of public agencies be conducted openly so that the public may remain informed. In enacting this article, the legislature finds and declares that it is the intent of the law that actions of state agencies be taken openly and their deliberation be conducted openly. The people of this state, and this is really important, do not yield the sovereignty to agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give the public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. Excuse me. The public insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. Next slide, please. And it goes on to say, and this is really, really important, each member of a state body who attends a meeting of such a body in violation of any provision of this article, and where the member intends to deprive the public of information to which the member knows or has reason to know the public is guilty of a misdemeanor. As a member of the public, I am entitled to know the following, therefore. The date on which Port of Cologne Section 13287 was amended by the legislature. Note, when I asked Mr. Locke this question, he was evasive, saying that the state board worked with the governor's office regarding the passage of SB 965, which included 13287. His response was not pegged, however, to the Port of Cologne version, but the one that was adopted previously. Why the Office Chief Counsel opposed lifting permissible ex parte communication for MS4 and other stormwater permits? If the Office of Chief Counsel obtained approval from the 2012 State Board to undermine 965 by adding 13287, which contained disclosure requirements that denied MS4 and other stormwater permits permissible ex parte communication. Please respond to the above 10 days from today. Next slide, please. To the chair's complaint that I refused to meet with Michael Walker, here's my response. Why would I want to meet with a guy who is the source of the problem? Further, Mr. Locker is not an expert in claims on ex parte communication and permitting. I'd be happy to meet with Mr. Locker, but in the company of the board chair and vice chair. The chair encouraged me to seek redress of my concerns by appealing to the State Committee on Environmental Quality. That will happen. In the meantime, I look to this board as the first step in the grievance resolution process. To that end, please answer the following 10 days from today. 1, did the legislature amend Port of Cologne section 13287? And 2, if it did not, how should the board respond? Needless to say, the board members are the political authority for the agency. They are responsible for managing staff, including the executive director and Office of Chief Counsel. And they have the authority to discipline staff in the event of misconduct or incompetence, though I don't believe the state board has ever disciplined a staff member. That would be difficult, I think, because it does not appear that the board does performance appraisals, does it? The board seems to be one big, happy, laid-back family. If it makes a mistake, no problem. The Office of Chief Counsel will protect it, even if it's harmful to the public interest. Next slide, please. This brings to mind another serious error the state board made, which has been called to your attention on several occasions, and recently in my May 7th presentation, without a response. From 2015 to the present, MS4 committees have spent millions on monitoring, sampling, and analysis for toxics and other TMDLs. The problem is that the results were never measured against water quality standards or numeric water quality objectives to determine exceedances, thereby making a demonstration of compliance impossible. As a consequence, the 2024 integrated report is invalid. Appendices A, B, J, which 303 lists and D lists TMDLs, are defective because they are not based on water quality standards, including those required of CTR. Exceedances are numeric water quality objectives. They were not, once again, because neither was adopted by the water boards, nor were they based on water quality criteria that was adopted by the water boards. Despite this, RB4 staff recommended that monitoring continue without providing a reason. State board also recommended that the 2024 IR not be invalidated, again, without providing a reason. And to make matters worse, the state board staff failed to respond adequately to my public records request. I will comment on this at the next meeting. Next slide, please. The board's conduct in the matters I have raised have been unethical, dishonest, and violative of the public trust in an agency whose purpose is to protect its interests, not only in terms of protecting water quality, but treating its members fairly, respectfully, and honestly, without gamesmanship. Instead, it seems that the board's true interest is to protect its organizational interests against criticism and allegations of improper performance and questionable conduct by staff. Lastly, a word about how public forum does not provide fairness and due process. For comments and presentations, the board requires submittals 4 days in advance of the meeting. That's okay. Where I have the problem is that board and staff have 2 full days to prepare my responses to presentations, and not in an objective manner. They're always offensive, deceptive, combative, in some cases non-responsive, and sarcastic. This is no way for a state agency to act. Again, I encourage the board to review Bagley King. And also, what else is troubling is that after staff responds to my presentation, I don't have the opportunity to rebut. So this bears a fairness issue here. Anyway, I'm finished, and thank you very much.
Thank you as well, Mr. Tahir. Really appreciate your comments. Thank you today.
Thank you
Next,
for
I'd like
your
to
response.
call up Gary Mulcahy, be followed by Walter Lamb.
I'm here, I think. Oh, there we go.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here to discuss the change in dates, hearing dates for the POI. On August 7th, our attorney submitted a request for extension of time for comments related to the July 24th, 2025 amendment to the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan. Those dates were set for a comment to be submitted by September 2nd, and hearing dates, I believe, very soon after that. Our attorney submitted a request for extension of time, which we appreciate that you saw and you acted on in part. But that extension of time requested a 90-day extension. The dates that you changed the hearing dates on the POI are September 25th and September 26th. September 26th is a state holiday, signed into law by Governor Reagan back when he was governor, and it's California Native American Day. There'll be activities and events going on all day long at the state capitol beginning at 10 in the morning. Tribes will be traveling to the state capitol on the 25th. Tribes, board members, dancers, those to participate in the events, and will be traveling home late on the 26th to the 27th, and will have no opportunity to participate in those hearing dates. So I ask you to, again, look at those dates, reevaluate them, and change them so that tribes can participate. Also within that letter, it was laid out that tribes all up and down the state during August, September, and even into the first part of October, celebrating their year-end ceremonies, special sacred ceremonies, round dances or dancing and closing, ceremonies to honor events and things that have happened throughout the year, closing down sacred sites for the winter, and those participations of tribal members and tribal sovereignty takes away the opportunity for us to even participate in some of these activities that are being scheduled. And I would like to point out that right now, in lieu of what's going on with the Delta Conveyance Project and voluntary agreements and the request for comments on the July 24th POI update, the site's hearing officer also has just put out proposed permit terms for the site's water right permit, which is going to need comments and hearing dates, which we will need to prepare for and participate in. We are buried not only with personal ceremonies, tribal ceremonies, sacred sites going on, sacred ceremonies going on, but the avalanche of proceedings and hearings that are smacking us and overloading us right now. And the additional thing that was submitted in that August 7th request for extension of time, we requested a 90-day extension of time to put it farther on and hearing dates later on in October, is that included in that letter was also a copy of the civil rights complaint that has been pending before this board for over a year and a half now and has been on this board agenda every board meeting since December and has not been acted on. We are requesting that some act be done, whether you reject the terms of the Title VI complaint, whether you resume negotiations with EPA investigators, or we resubmit investigation of the civil rights complaint. That's my comments for today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And there's a couple of board members that we'll be seeing this coming weekend at our egg drop ceremony on the McLeod River. And we appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulcahy. It's really good to see you. Appreciate your comments. Do know, we did our best when trying to find dates that we would be able to land, and the dates that we ended up landing on were because of board schedules. And hear you though, that on the second hearing date, it is California Native American Day. We'll reconvene internally and see how best we can make sure we're accommodating the voices of tribes and environmental justice communities. It is really critical to us and is why you saw us be responsive in extending the comment period. But I sympathize. I know there is a lot going on. And so just appreciate the continued engagement and appreciate your words this morning at Public Forum. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And hopefully we can find some different dates because it is discriminatory to tribes, basically because they can't participate. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulcahy. Next, I'd like to call up Walter Lamb. Good morning, Mr. Lamb. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, board members, staff. Walter Lamb, representing the Bynum Wetlands Land Trust. This is my fourth time I've come to speak on a single issue. And I want to start by saying that anytime our organization engages with a public agency, we do recognize that the agency likely has a pretty large staff, a pretty large workload, and limited staff and other resources to address that limited workload. So it's never, we always try to be as patient as possible and, to try to work through issues collaboratively. Our concern with the issue that I've been raising is that we see the same thing happening again with another decision. Just to summarize, vote in April by the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission about taking terms like climate change, ocean acidification, environmental justice out of their work plan. I'm not here to debate the vote. That's a subjective, right? Did they do the right thing or the wrong thing? And there's all kinds of arguments in both directions. That's not my purpose. My purpose is trying to get a better understanding. And none of the facts are in dispute. We know that state water board employees are the staff of the commission. We know that the commission members rely on those state water board employees to provide all the information, right, within reason at their disposal to help inform a vote. We know that that didn't happen in this case. We know that there was written guidance. We know that state water board employees staffing the commission were aware of the existence of that written guidance. And we know that they didn't raise the existence of the written guidance. And it's happening again with the commission's deliberations on its comprehensive conservation and management plan. That's why it's hard for us to sit back and be overly patient when we see the same thing that we're trying to get information on happening again. And so the other thing from a timing perspective is, look, I've been an activist for 25 years, environmental activist. And so I do have a fairly good sense of when somebody just doesn't want to answer a question. And I'm getting that sense very strongly right now. One of your chief deputy directors was one of the people at the April vote that voted to strip those terms out of the work plan. Again, right or wrong. And so she, who's sitting right there, would know also that she did not have access to the written EPA guidance. And she would be able to speak literally right now as to whether that's been determined as problematic within the state water board, or whether those state water board employees did exactly what the water board expected them to, right? So that's what we're trying to get at is this an isolated incident? Doesn't seem so. It seems to be that those employees were following state water board policy when they withheld highly relevant information from commission members making that vote. And again, we're seeing it continue to happen. So I'll close. I appreciate your time. Not trying to be difficult, really trying to work through this collaboratively, because the other way, which we do quite a bit, is way more time consuming and expensive and unpleasant for everybody. So it would be great if we could get some information sooner than later. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lamb. Mr. Lawfer.
Chair Esquivel, Michael Lawfer, Chief Counsel for the board. Just to Mr. Lamb's concern, this is actually an issue we've been following. And just yesterday, both Ms. Mogus and myself had reached out to make sure that we're getting the factual summary put together, as well as I had shared a draft transmittal with our staff. So I expect Mr. Lamb will be hearing from the state board shortly on this issue.
Thank you.
Much appreciated, Mr. Lawfer. And thank you again, Mr. Lamb.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps up public forum. Again, appreciate all our public forum commenters and brings us to our first item of board business, which is consideration of the board meeting minutes from the August 5th and 6th board meeting. Looking to fellow board colleagues if there's any adjustments. And then otherwise, I think we're ready for a motion.
I'll move to adopt.
Second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Morgan,
Abstain.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
and Chair Escobar.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Board meeting minutes are adopted. I should have noted quickly, a note on the agenda for those of you that haven't caught, we are postponing item number 3, which was our resolution for the fund expenditure plan, but we still have item number 2, and we still have item number 4 here. So we will now go to item number 2, which is consideration of a proposed resolution for our drinking water state revolving fund intended use plan. Give a moment for folks to get up here. Good morning. Good to see you all.
Yeah, good morning, Chair Escobar, members of the board. Great to be here with you. So joining me, I'm Joe Karkowski. I'm the Deputy Director of the Division of Financial Assistance. So with me are Kristen Appold, who heads up our Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, Jean Fung with our Office of Chief Counsel, and then Mike Downey, who heads up our Loans and Grants branch. Next slide, please. So we'll cover, kind of give a recap of fiscal year 24-25. Just touch on some of the public comments we received. We'll go into a little more detail through each element of the intended use plan, and then talk about some of the changes we've made, comments and responses. Next slide, please. So it's always a challenge to try to describe and capture all the work that's done in this drinking water space when it comes to funding. So this is another one of our attempts to do that, certainly both between the intended use plan and the fund expenditure plan. There's lots of information there. And certainly our Division of Financial Assistance, our great staff have the lead in working on these funding programs and getting money to these projects, but we work really closely with our accounting group and the Division of Administrative Services. Of course, our Office of Chief Counsel, we work closely with throughout. The Division of Drinking Water, we consult with them on many, if not all of these projects. Often we'll have our Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs involved as well, and sometimes our partners at the regional boards. And of course, our folks in non-governmental organization partners, EJ groups, and technical assistance providers as well contribute to the success of our program. So we did quite a bit this last year in terms of new agreements, so new individual projects, about 99 in total, a little over $700 million. And the board will also soon hear from our comms group about our accomplishments for the fiscal year overall. And DFA is a little over $2 billion in funding. So those new agreements are, we often focus on that, and that's what the intended use plan is really focused on. What do we plan to fund moving forward? But we also have an ongoing, pretty significant workload. So there are about 300 plus ongoing individual projects. So those are often in construction. So there's still about, $1.5 billion to be dispersed for those projects. Kind of breaking it down a little bit more, with where we have principal forgiveness, so that's what PF stands for, or grant. There are about 330 or so projects we worked on in total, and that also includes technical assistance work plans. So you may recall a number of years ago, we've started making big investments in technical assistance. It's a way of speeding up the planning process. So that's been a pretty significant investment and effort. So what we're trying to capture here is both those new projects, some of the including work plans, as well as new funding agreements, amendments to work plans, as well as amendments to previous funding agreements. So again, that's a pretty huge workload and a pretty big investment including both like the new agreements about $239 million and $69 million for those amended work plans and funding agreements. Of course, the big dollar amounts often come from our loan program. So we got a significant amount of funding committed this past fiscal year. We also have quite a few amendments. And again, a lot of those amendments, some of them are don't necessarily add funding to them, but they might add time. So it's not unusual for projects to run into challenges or delays. And that's part of what our staff have to stay on top of. And we work with those folks, our funding recipients, to review their requests for time extensions, work with Division of Drinking Water as well on those. And, that ends up being a big part of our workload for the whole team. And then finally, we do also have the emerging contaminants funding, which we're very happy that we're able to get out a number of agreements for emerging contaminants. Some of those also include, besides the principal forgiveness or grant, they also include a loan component. Okay, next slide, please. And just as a reminder, the actions that we take, it's been an interesting year in terms of, what's gone on the federal side of things. So you may all recall early on, we had a pause in our funding. We weren't actually able to access our funds. So that kind of threw us for an initial loop and then raised questions about whether we're actually going to see some of our grant funding, which is normally kind of a routine administrative process. So EPA did release the grant allotments in May. We submitted our grant application soon after that. So there are a number of, this IUP has a number of different separate assistance agreements. It's not just one. So between our team and DAS, we went through that process, got our application submitted timely. We then posted this IUP for a 30-day comment period. We had our board workshop, got a lot of great comments that we'll talk about and go through. And we actually received our capitalization grant awards, which was exciting. So that was one of those items that we were wondering about, but we got the awards in the normal time frame that we generally get the capitalization grant. So we've gotten them all. They're all conditioned on our submittal of the IUP. So we can't draw down on those capitalization grants until we submit the drinking water SRF intended use plan, and we have 60 days from award to do that. We did, the board a few weeks ago adopted the Clean Water SRF IUP. So we submitted that to the US EPA, and we're currently drawing down on those Clean Water SRF grants. And so that brings us here for consideration of adoption. Next slide, please. So we got about 15 comments, a variety of them, prepared responses to all of those comments, but we'll highlight a number of those throughout the rest of the staff presentation, but happy to, if we don't address one that's of interest to the board members, we're happy to address those as we go along. So we'll first turn to Mike, who will go over some of the loan and emerging contaminants and lead service line items.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, board members. Next slide, please. So I just want to start by saying no recommended changes to eligibilities and limits in regards to drinking water state revolving fund repayable loans. So just as a recap, we are sticking with what was provided in the original draft, which was a target of $300 million that resulted in adding $370 million worth of loan projects to the fundable list. And we are keeping a $50 million maximum loan amount for this year based on the demand. And then I want to give a special shout out to next year where scoring will begin for the first time for those loan projects. And that was the Drinking Water SRF policy amendment that was the board adopted in May. That'll take effect. So for folks that are putting together their applications for next year, we're helping walk through those new scoring elements. Next slide, please. So we did receive a couple comments on the loan side. So one is a common comment that encourages broader eligibility for disadvantaged neighborhoods within a water systems service area. And that's something that both doesn't align as well with some of the state statutes, but also is just something that's been hard to justify with the huge amount of demand from small and disadvantaged communities. And we continue to see more demand than we really have grant and principal forgiveness capacity for. So that's not something that we have included as eligibility in this year's IUP. However, that is an element of the loan scoring prioritization that was added to the new scoring system. So there's affordability criteria, which does look at elements of disadvantaged areas within a larger service area where the project would solely benefit that neighborhood. Also, we're asked to explore options to increase the per project maximum. And I'll give a plug for an upcoming SRF stakeholder meeting where we're going to do a combined meeting with the clean water and drinking water folks, looking at our capacity model and doing a little bit of explaining and brainstorming on, well, what are the elements that we can control? What are the assumptions in the model? That includes our own ability to alter interest rates, fees, loan terms. And so I think that will help explain a little bit more about what we can and can't do with loan capacity, and also may give stakeholders other ideas to help us pursue, ways to increase that loan capacity. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that's September 4th is our next SRF stakeholder meeting. So if you'd like to be included, please reach out. Next slide, please. I'll start again by saying no proposed changes to what's included in terms of eligibilities for hexavalent chromium. So Chrome 6 projects are included as being eligible for some grant and principal forgiveness if they're benefiting small, expanded small, or medium disadvantaged communities, or small, medium income communities, which is the MIC. Moderate income communities. Thank you. Different M. And so that's kind of baked into the policy where we share that Chrome 6 and PFAS both share the same priority as projects that are addressing a failing status, also considered a Category C compliance project. And so because they are not out of compliance yet, but there is this time allowance to address these new limits, we're treating them as if they are at that same priority as a out of compliance project. Next slide, please. So generally received support for including these Chrome 6 projects in that prioritization category. There was some requests that we would reserve funds for Chrome 6 projects. At this point, we're not recommending to set aside or reserve funds for specific objectives. And that's mostly due to the time constraints and appropriation deadlines that come with these different pots of funding. And so really feeling like we're going to continue to do prioritize, but then a readiness to proceed as projects are shovel ready. Another request was to allow medium and large water systems to be eligible for planning grants. And that's not something that's included in the draft IUP. Those planning costs are reimbursable through a construction funding agreement. And we really reserve the planning grants for those small and disadvantaged communities that don't have the funds to even get started on the planning efforts and put together those initial application packages. So our current guidance is for those medium and large communities to continue to work on their planning documents. And those are costs that could be reimbursable if a project ultimately emerges. Next slide, please. All right, just a quick reminder that our intended use plan has grown over the last few years to have baby intended use plans at the end. So we have an emerging contaminant, supplemental IUP, lead service line IUP, and an ASADRA, additional supplemental appropriations for Disaster Relief Act of 2019, IUP. And so these are associated with separate capitalization grants from EPA, as Joe was describing. Next slide, please. So just a quick reminder on emerging contaminants. So this emerging contaminant funding is federal funding and comes with all the federal requirements, those maximum federal requirements. We're really focused here in California on PFAS, 1,2,3-TCP, manganese, 1,4-dioxane, and perchlorate would be the main applications we're seeing, but anything that's on one of EPA's contaminant candidate lists is eligible. In general, we are showing sufficient application demand for EC dollars for those large and medium non-disadvantaged communities. We do have more money than we have demand for at the moment for small communities and disadvantaged communities. So we're continuing to work with applicants to get those applications in, and that is money that is set aside because of the limits that come with the capitalization grants and the federal requirements. Next slide, please. I do want to mention one change that we did include in the revised draft, which is giving the Deputy Director of DFA authority to transfer some of the EC funds back to the Clean Water SRF program if new applications are submitted for emerging contaminants. So if you'll recall, we have asked the board to transfer the Clean Water SRF emerging contaminants allocation to the Drinking Water SRF program. These are funds that were authorized by IIJA, and we do have one more year's worth of Clean Water SRF EC funds as well. In order to receive the capitalization grant, we need to demonstrate that we have projects that can receive those funds, and we do not have any applications for Clean Water SRF EC projects. However, we are open and willing to continue conversing with stakeholders if there is a need in that arena. So that was one of the things we did talk with EPA about, was the ability to transfer back if need be while we're still in the project period of that capitalization grant. In general, we did receive support for increasing the limits for the emerging contaminant funding. I'll comment on two additional comments that we received, which is advocating for operation and maintenance costs to be included in EC eligible funding, and how, unfortunately, that's just not an eligibility for these federal grants. Also an ask to maximize emerging contaminant funding for technical assistance. And I'll add that at the moment, for the communities that are dealing with emerging contaminants, we feel that there is funding in our technical assistance program to cover those few instances. We're also increasingly working with US EPA. They have their Water TA program, and there's a lot of federal funds for emerging contaminants through that program to provide technical assistance. So that's increased coordination that we're doing. And then just additional analysis to look at the overall need for funds to go in that direction. And so that may be something that you would see as part of a future work plan. Next slide, please. So the lead service line replacement funding under the Drinking Water SRF program, We continue to get allotments. We are not applying for this year's California allotment, and we also did not apply for last year's California allotment, which means we cannot apply in the future for that allotment. We continue to not have sufficient application demand to meet the amount of funds we've already received from US EPA. And so we're continuing to focus on those communities that need to finish their lead service line inventories or their inventories in general, and continue to find ways to maximize our use of funds. So the short version is we're not applying for this year's CAP grant. And finally, with the ASADRA funds, again, these are for water systems that were damaged in 2018 natural disasters, namely wildfires for California. We have 3 projects that qualify for this funding. 1 has been executed. We're working hard on the last 2, and we'll continue reporting on this until those funds are dispersed. Next slide, please. We did receive a couple comments on lead service line. Notably, support to not apply for additional lead service line funding this year. We did receive a comment about replacing the service line up to the meter box. And this is a little bit in the weeds, but in general, we need to replace the entire service line per the federal requirements. So not just up to the meter box, but beyond up to the building inlet. So that part is eligible, but you must do more. And the comment to encourage DFA to streamline the review and approval process for these projects, we definitely agree with, and we have been doing additional coordination and elevation with US EPA on this program to make sure it's getting the proper attention that we feel it deserves. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Kristen Abhold, and she'll talk about the grant and principal forgiveness for generally small and disadvantaged communities.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. I'm going to start off with some of the notable public comments that we received and a lot of great feedback. And I'm happy to say that we were able to respond to a lot of these suggestions and recommendations. The first is to exclude interim administrator assistance, technical assistance, and planning assistance for the cost per connection calculation methodology. This is something that we included in the appendix to the IUP to have more clarity around the methodology we use to calculate cost per connection. We got a lot of recommendations to rethink this methodology, and we agreed. So a revision has been made so that the cost per connection methodology only includes construction funding over the past 5 years. In essence, what this means is that more funding is potentially unlocked for projects that are coming in for construction assistance. The second comment that we have on here, we received a number of recommendations from different groups to have higher maximum grant principal forgiveness limits, allowing for higher cost per connection eligibility for certain projects like consolidation and just in general, just open things up a little bit more, and to allow the deputy director to approve requests above the IUP limits. And so we took a look at our proposed grant and PF limits, which, as you recall, we had some tiered thresholds for projects under 200 connections. And we did increase those limits, and I'll go over those changes in some slides that come later in the presentation. We did also include some language that would allow the deputy director to approve requests up to 20% of the maximum grant principal forgiveness construction limits that we have in that table for good cause. Again, for projects with 200 connections or less. And I'll go into this in a bit more detail when we get to that slide. The third comment that we received was, and I'll go over what option 1 is in the next slide, but recommendation that the deputy director be given discretion to determine systems as failing equivalent as part of the new funding prioritization. One of the proposed directions that we have for the IUP is to align project categories with the safer status of systems failing and at risk. And we wanted to include some language in here that allows some flexibility for DFA in coordination with DDW to allow for projects that to be funded for systems that are not designated as failing or at risk, but we do have concurrence from the regulating agencies that there is a risk of failure and the project would help address that. Next slide, please. So we have for fiscal year 2025-26, approximately $1.04 billion available for projects. And there has been some discussion internally around the eligibility, project eligibility for funding. And I'm going to go over two proposed options for the board to consider. Option one, which was included in the draft IUP, it moves away from utilizing the previous project categories as defined in the drinking water SRF policy from categories A through F, and to instead focus project eligibilities based on projects that address a system's safer status of failing and at risk, and continue to prioritize projects for that are consolidation. Option two for the board's consideration, which was not included in the original draft IUP, would continue to use the project categories A through F, regardless of safer status, and consolidation projects would continue to be prioritized, with a note indicating that complete applications for failing and at-risk systems would be prioritized for funding. The recommendation by staff is option one, based on our demand analysis for our failing and at-risk systems, and in general, what we're seeing across the state. But I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. The next slide, please. So to kind of understand what we're talking about here, here's a quick, very high-level summary of project categories and some of the language that we're using here. On the left-hand side is the failing criteria categories as determined and defined by the Division of Drinking Water since 2017, and this has evolved over the years. You can see that it has water quality violations with open enforcement actions, primary, secondary, E. coli, treatment technique violations with open enforcement actions. There's monitoring and reporting violations where there are multiple that have occurred within the last few years, and you have ones that are still outstanding. And then the newest category is source capacity and water outage violations with open enforcement actions. And just for a reminder for the board, an enforcement action is when DDW or the LPA is telling the system they need to do something to address their violations. And there could be one or more violations that enforcement action is trying to address. We also have the safer status of at risk, which is identified through DDW's risk assessment, which is looking at a multitude of data from water systems and from our regulatory partners in DDW that looks at trends in water quality, accessibility, affordability, and then technical and managerial financial capacity of systems. So that is for option one. So I'm trying to lay this down because I'm going to be mentioning option one and two on the next few slides. Option two on the right-hand side of the screen are categories A through F as defined in the drinking water SRF policy, which are historical categories that have been used by the program to help us prioritize projects for the drinking water SRF program. In the policy, there are descriptions for each of these, which was a bit too long to put on a slide. So I can share that with you if you aren't sure where to find that. Category A is an immediate health risk. B, untreated or at-risk sources. C is compliance or shortage problems. D is inadequate reliability. E is secondary risks, which is often it's secondary MCL violations or contamination issues. And then F is just other projects. Typically, we bucket that as your traditional CIP improvements. Next slide, please. So we pulled the full comprehensive list, and in response to Board Member Morgan's suggestion during the last board meeting on this topic, we really looked at all projects regardless of whether or not they were a priority or not. Option one, which is all of the blue colored lines in this graph, represent all of the projects on the comprehensive list that would be addressing a failing or at-risk system, their consolidation project. There's also, in addition to what's in the comprehensive list, it's known need or demand for the drinking water funding that's supporting technical assistance, interim assistance, and projected budget increases for projects that we've already committed funding to. So these are projects that have not gone out to bid yet, where they're going to come back after they've gone out to bid potentially for a funding increase, and also those that are in construction where they are encountering higher costs. So those numbers are based off of our continued engagement with our systems and projects that we're managing. It's not on the comprehensive list, so we made sure that that was included here. Option 2, which is the green colored bar on top, represents all of the other projects on the comprehensive list that don't fit into the failing, at-risk, or consolidation project categories. On the right-hand side is available funding, both for this fiscal year, 25-26, and then the projected amount of funding that we're anticipating for the program next fiscal year, which is assuming full drinking water SRF appropriations from the federal government. You can see, obviously, that when we are, go ahead.
Ms. Apple,
Yes.
1 second. Board
Go
Member
ahead.
Morgan.
Hi, yes, and thank you for compiling this. This is really helpful. Can you talk about what are the other projects? You have some examples of what those are?
Yes, so those are project categories D through F typically, and then and that's how they were marked in the database. And some of them are projects in TA that were that are not they don't have a complete construction application in. They're not ready for funding quite yet, but they're in the queue. But predominantly they're D through F projects.
So, and I believe that those other projects are not currently identified as being failing or at risk.
Correct.
So, and again, one of the revisions we have proposed to the intended use plan is to allow us some discretion, to review those projects more closely, working with Division of Drinking Water, the local primacy agency, to determine whether they've been categorized appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I was looking for more of an example of a project that was there, and understanding that that flexibility has been added, which I'm grateful for. Thank you. That's really helpful, because just looking back and I'm really looking at the unintended consequences and the staff time and the really so appreciate that you are taking on the initiative to help to look at some of those, because many times those projects that fall into that type of category, they're falling over there and they don't have someone to advocate for them to get put on the list. And if they do, there's time for that, whether that it's that small agency or that DAC to do so, or the TA provider, and then also our staff time. And so that's part of my concern. It's just really that going back and forth to see. Two systems that I can just think of off the top of my head that fell into that are Lanier and Allensworth. And so Lanier had been in receivership for 10 years. And so therefore the TMF wasn't hitting for the methodology. And so multiple conversations had to be had for Lanier to get put onto the list. I'm not want to go through the whole history of Lanier, but there is a long history of failing. And for me, it would, that's something for the methodology to be worked on, and for it not to fall through the cracks, and for that amount of staff time and resources also for our external partners to use to advocate for to get onto the list, is where I'm really looking for us to pause to really take time to look at that methodology so that we don't have other systems like Lanier falling through, and the time for someone to recognize that it has fallen through the cracks. Also, Allensworth, long history of failure, repeated failures. And the thing is that they would have a failure, get themselves back up and running, and then again. And so therefore they weren't getting a violation because they were in and out of compliance. And so they weren't hitting the marks. And so again, falling through the cracks of the methodology, even though they have been working with the Division of Financial Assistance for many years. I want to say it had been at least 10 that they had been working on their application and had just hit a snag with environmental at the federal level. And so they had been pushing through for a project. However, they did not hit the methodology and fell through the cracks. And so they hit another delay because of a methodology. So that's just two examples. There are more. And so that's where my concern really is, and with moving forward on pushing this through. And I hear that, on the loan side, we're saying, hey, this is where we want to go for next year. And so I really want to, put some thought about on that of, of forecasting, this is where we would like to go, and working on that methodology with our partners to really make sure that we have that tuned in a little better, so we don't have systems like Lanier and Allensworth falling through cracks. And not knowing what the systems are within this option two, it still gives me pause, because there could be more Allensworth and Laniers in there that I don't feel that we should have to have those additional conversations every single time one of those comes up. They should just immediately come through the methodology clean and be able to put onto the system and move through.
Yeah, thanks, Board Member Morgan. And we have Andrew Altavote here from Division of Drinking Water, if you'd like to discuss some of the evolution and next steps with how DDW is doing the needs assessment and assessing safer status. So if that's helpful, we can bring Andrew up. Yeah, I do think, one of the challenges in this space is that pretty much every project that comes to us is a need from a small community, right? There are generally we don't see a lot of quote unquote bad projects. So what it really comes down to is, should we have some sort of prioritization within that space? And when we do have that kind of prioritization, what should that look like? And so what the original staff proposal and still the staff recommendation is to mirror what the board direction was starting last year in terms of adopting the safer goals, focusing on failing systems and consolidations. And then because we do at this moment in time have some additional funding, expanding that to at-risk systems. So, the needs assessment shows, I think, more than $5 billion of need for primarily small systems across the board. So, and we don't have that. So I think part of that, challenge in front of us is then within that space, how do you prioritize? So we're suggesting one approach. Another approach certainly is to, be more expansive in eligibility and basically fund projects as they're ready to go. I think our concern with that approach is, one, it actually is a large workload to kind of take all comers and work with all systems that have potential needs and try to work through that process. And then it becomes essentially sort of a whoever's ready and now, then we get the funding to those folks who are ready, and we keep doing that until we just don't have funding available, which would likely leave some failing systems without funding when we get to them. Now, certainly like the example with Lanier, we've provided lots of funding to Lanier over the years, and we're currently providing technical assistance to look at the feasibility of consolidation with a nearby community. So consolidation is still prioritized, irrespective of safer status. So that's been the board direction for a number of years, as well as to look at those consolidation options and opportunities so that we have fewer of these small systems.
And thank you for your response. I don't want to continue to go back and forth. I'm really looking to have eligibility so that there can be decision-making that is occurring and not just hard limits, and for project management to occur, of really making sure that there is a focus on the priorities. And so that's why my ask would be to still have the safer priorities included, and that we would rely upon the division to use project management to ensure that we are working on the highest priorities and not just whatever's ready and just pushing things through. And so, being in division previously and putting those project management guardrails on, I know that it is possible. And that is possible not just to have just a high workload and just push everything through. And so that's what I'm asking for the division to do now, is to really use project management skill sets, manage the projects based on the priorities, and to use professional judgment on those that come through and not have to go back and forth through multiple meetings to determine if something then can be put on the safer list in order to move. We can still determine if it needs to be on the safer list because that's what we should be doing. But making sure that we are not putting unnecessary delay on projects prior to moving them through. We should be able to take a look and use professional judgment to get them moving while we are also in parallel taking a look at and seeing whether or not they should be put onto the safer list. And so that's where I'm looking at it. And it's also based on my history of working with the division and knowing that it does not need to just be a free-for-all and just moving things through, that we really can use our management skill sets and really prioritize projects as they should be prioritized.
Appreciate that, board member. I appreciate the support again of creating those priorities, but to your point, having the flexibility for some discretion at the Division of Financial Assistance to make sure, if there is a worthwhile project there that, although, may not officially be categorized currently as failing or at risk, to have some discretion to be able to make sure it gets funded. I think that's appropriate. Looking to board member Firestone.
Thanks. Yeah. And agree with the concerns, but I think I land in wanting, I want to just understand. So first of all, can you clarify, at this point, both Lanier and Allensworth would fall in option 1 at this point, right? It's just the issue is they had to go through a process because they weren't initially in failing at all times. And so the concern is whether that would create some, or the concern is that additional back and forth to reconcile what really clearly is a failing system. So should be qualified that way. If that will delay or that causes some friction and delay in getting funding to the projects. And, certainly share that concern. I do think, though, if we can do, so my understanding of the proposal is that we use the safer categories and we're adding the discretion to try to minimize that friction when there's corrections. So it allows some discretion, or it ensures there's not a hard line if things are miscategorized. Frankly, I would consider those. Things don't always follow an algorithm perfectly. I think those are good examples, but also allows us to have a consistent system across the board so that we're really clear on how we're prioritizing and moving forward on projects. I think within the SAFER program, we would want to make sure those things are corrected across the board. And I know you agree with that too, in terms of addressing, it's good to have those corrections. So I think the issue is, either way, whether it's project management, prioritization, discretion within the division, or some back and forth with the Division of Drinking Water or TA providers, when there's things that are miscategorized or maybe aren't the high, determining whether it's the highest or low or slightly less priority, that there's going to be added time. And I think if we can provide some clarity of what we're looking for and improve the methodology and categorization, that's the way that the current proposal is trying to head us. So my sense is that's what we're trying to do here. But I do think that it's important for us to be doubling down on making failing and at-risk systems the highest priority, utilizing a more unified, comprehensive understanding of what that means across our different silos of divisions, and correcting, any methodology or list problems as efficiently as possible so that all the divisions are working together to move that forward, rather than kind of continuing another year of different categories and sort of disjointedness.
Thank you, board member. Seeing no further discussion at the dais, then we continue with the presentation.
Next slide, please. So the funding numbers that I had on the previous slide are reflected here in terms of number of projects. So the left-hand side gives you a summary of what we have accomplished this last fiscal year for supporting grant and principal forgiveness projects throughout kind of our portfolio of services that we have. Then there were 330 projects that we were able to help support last year, either through new construction or planning agreements, new TA work plans, or amendments. You can see we do quite a bit of amendments every year. The right-hand side is, again, a summation of the projects that are on the comprehensive list, and also includes known needs for both TA and for construction and planning amendments, which are not captured on the comprehensive list. So you see here for option 1, the staff proposal, that we have 424 projects potentially in terms of demand for staff. And then option 2, which again are those D through F project categories and a few others, that would be in total 545 projects. So just wanted to get a sense of what the project number was in addition to the funding amount associated with them.
I apologize. I have a question / clarification. When you refer to the comprehensive list, you're only referring to option 1. And so it is, or are you talking with 2?
Also 2. So we did update the comprehensive list to include all projects.
Okay, thank you.
Regardless of category and safer status. And that is reflected online in the IUP. Okay. Next slide, please. This is a lot. I don't think I'm going to dig in too far because it can get a little confusing, but wanted to outline for both planning on this slide, and then next slide is construction. If we were to revert back to the category A through F eligibilities in the 2023-24 drinking water SRF IUP, which was the last instance in which all categories were potentially eligible for grant and principal forgiveness. You'll see who would be eligible for grant principal forgiveness for planning on this slide based on the system's size and disadvantaged community status, or DAC status. On the right-hand side is then the comparison to the staff proposal in the draft IUP. So there's some similarities, but then some differences. Go ahead.
On option 2, why would expanded small community water systems be excluded if we're prioritizing the safer priorities?
So the safer priorities are, again, focused on safer status, so failing or at risk. So you can have an expanded small community DAC system that's not failing or at risk or pursuing consolidation.
Correct. And so option 2 would prioritize that project. It would not exclude it.
So option 2 reflects the criteria as defined in the IUP from 2023-24. So if the board wanted to move in a different direction from what was outlined in that previous IUP, that can be changed.
Okay, I believe that the proposed resolution states that it would prioritize safer priorities.
So, correct. So you would have to balance, I think, then whether or not they're fitting here or they are within the safer status category. We would need to maybe come up with a new table. Jean, do you want to?
Yeah, maybe to clarify. So the proposed resolution number 2 does say that the amended IUP would continue to make failing and at-risk safer projects eligible. So I believe this comparison, rather than option 2, maybe the heading should be what is eligible under the 23-24 IUP. It's not exactly option 2. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
And do you have a follow-up question on this slide?
No, it's just, I did not believe this reflected option 2. And so I just thank Ms. Funk for clarifying that it does not accurately reflect option 2.
You're right.
Option 2 would actually mirror option 1 and just provide additional flexibility within the Division of Financial Assistance, and versus the division needing to go to Division of Drinking Water or come to the board for that additional flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. You would need to disregard the heading for option 2, and instead, this is the criteria that was in the FY 2023-24 Drinking Water SRF IUP. And so this is looking at construction grant PF eligibility options. In that IUP, there was, again, a kind of a difference in eligibility based on category and DAC status and MHI. So if a system is not failing or at risk, this is potentially what they could be eligible for. Next slide, please. So outside of the project or system eligibility, what we are proposing, regardless of what direction the board decides to go, is the following construction project grant and principal forgiveness limits. As we had mentioned previously, this shift from what we had in the previous IUP is largely driven by some of the language in Prop 4, which is going to be administered by the Drinking Water SRF IUP. We did get public feedback on increasing the limits here and allowing for more flexibility for cost overruns or higher costs, especially associated with consolidation projects. And there's also been some concerns about projects that serve domestic wells and state smalls, which also may be a little bit higher. And so we've made the following modifications. We did increase the maximum grant PF thresholds for projects below 200 connections. And then we also included some language that allows the deputy director to approve projects with higher costs above those thresholds for a good cause, which could include projects benefiting domestic wells and state smalls that are consolidating, which typically have a higher cost associated with them. Are there any questions about this table? Okay. Great. Next slide, please.
Okay. Thanks, Kristen, and thanks, Mike. So again, the options that we had before the board, and Michael and Jean will have to help us as the board considers their options. But we actually officially have two we call them change sheets, but the first change sheet is actually the two optional resolutions. And then the second one is what Kristen just covered. So staff still, we do recommend, the adoption of option 1 in terms of the resolution. We've heard the conversation. I do believe we have the kind of discretion that we need to fund those projects that are needed by systems that are at risk of failure, regardless of whether they're officially labeled as failing or at risk. And that's certainly something I agree with Board Member Morgan. Our DFA project managers can primarily in working with the funding applicants make that judgment. We always do consult with the regulatory agency as a routine part of our process. So I think we have a lot of that discretion that is needed to make sure those projects that are really critical do get funded. I think the other advantage of option one is we, get the IUP adopted and we move on and we can start focusing on funding our projects. Our staff have started teeing up for one of our proposals is some changes with the expedited drinking water grant program. We'll have to bring some of that back to you, but the IUP allows us to use the federal funding for the expedited drinking water program. So we have already about 35 or so projects that are teed up and ready to go in terms of invitations to a number of applicants. So I would still recommend that we adopt that staff option one as far as the resolution goes, along with the change sheet two. And we're happy to take any additional questions at this point.
Thank you. Much appreciation. Board Member Morgan, just wanting to check in with you. So, your understanding of option two is that it supports essentially option one, but with flexibility, right? But I just want to make sure we're kind of being clear or understanding between the two options and the intent.
That is correct. And so my understanding of option two is that it is option one with greater flexibility. And so my understanding of option one is that it adopts the safer, I'm going to call it the methodology for funding. And so if there are the unintended consequences, it accepts those. And that's where my major concern is. I agree with Mr. Karkowski, where it does give the flexibility of working with the Division of Drinking Water. However, it does not give the flexibility of option two, as much flexibility, because what it will do is Division of Drinking Water will have to provide a violation and say, yes, it does need to go on to the list. If it does not go on to the list, then it does not get funded. And so there are hard lines with option one, and that's where my great concern is. I do not have a concern with moving to option one. I would like it to be as it was classified in the loan program, where we work with our stakeholders and we work with Division of Drinking Water over this next year to take a look at the methodology, look at the couple of examples that I provided and look at other examples that have come up and to work on that methodology before incorporating it. And so this is be a forecast of this is where we're moving. Let's work on it. Let's work out those unintended consequences and let's have it within our plan for next year. For this year, we are not, the option two, for the way I understand it, would not be that far off. We are still working off of the safer criteria. We are still working, we're just not fully adopting all of the methodology. We're saying we are still prioritizing, we're still using the safer list. That's what we're working off of. However, we are giving that flexibility to the Division of Financial Assistance to identify a project, start it moving down the financial assistance path towards funding, while concurrently working to get that project onto the list. And so this is going to be, well, there are parallel paths versus consecutive, where you have to have one before the other. So therefore, we are expediting that funding. And so that's what I'm looking for. And it's, yes, it is delaying the full implementation, but it's not delaying the, I don't want to say partial implementation, but it is, we are still taking that methodology. We're still utilizing it. We're just giving more flexibility to the Division of Financial Assistance this year to identify a project. They look and they say, yes, Allensworth has been falling on and off. They need to be moving forward. They have been working with us for 10 years to move this project forward. This came way before SAFER. We see a great need here. we shouldn't stop working on them because they have not received a violation from the Division of Drinking Water. We should continue to work on this project, move it along, and we can concurrently have conversations with our partners.
Appreciate that. But to be clear, when it comes to Allensworth, it's not as if at any moment we've stopped working with them because of a.
I'm just
Okay.
using it as an example.
Okay. I just wanted to be- I just
these
want
are
to be very
ones that we
clear.
are all well aware of. So I'm using those as the example projects because we're all aware of the well aware of the circumstances of these communities. And it was one that was not identified. It was not on the list. And they had to work to get on the list. They had to wait till they had a violation in order to keep their project moving. They were not on the list. They fell through the cracks of the methodology. It has since been resolved, but I want to use projects that fell through the methodology that we are well aware of so that we can have to me, the most real life conversation we can around it.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member. Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, thank you. I've really appreciated the thoughts here, and I appreciate, Board Member Morgan, your concerns about projects potentially slipping through the cracks or being deprioritized where they should be on the list and moving forward to funding. It's a real challenge, right? I mean, looking at the needs assessment and the $5 billion of projects and weighing that and all the projects that are currently in the queue and that we know are going to move forward through the safer prioritization regardless here. So I'm having a little bit of hesitation and just trying to figure this out. Is the extra as I'm understanding option 2, I think is we would have to move forward today and then come back again, I think in a few months with an amended, changed IUP to reflect that other approach. And I could see some benefits to that, but I'm just wondering if maybe there's another way to look at this. And I think we've always committed to continuous improvement and learning from our experiences and helping to make sure that we're doing best by the information that we have available. So what I'm wondering is sort of that commitment to come back, maybe not in the midstream here, but maybe with next year's IUP, far enough in advance so we have a chance to take another look at the safer criteria, what we've learned from it over the next few months, and then figuring out if we need to make any tweaks for the next year's IUP. I think that would be my proposal, or that's where I'm inclined to go, rather than adding another amendment here in a few months. I think that might be a little bit easier, and I'm building into that my thought about the flexibility that we're proposing to add here to allow projects to be added to the list immediately if there's a need that DDW flags. So I think that might provide both opportunities here to say, hey, this is it's an imperfect system, and we're trying to balance a lot of needs, a lot of projects. We know the demand's out there. There's a lot of great projects. At the same time, we need to make priority calls at some point along the way. And I think it's our job at the board to provide as much direction and clarity as we can to staff so that they know how to take the ball and run with it to get these key projects funded. So trying to find that balance and open to ideas, but that's kind of where I'm leaning at the moment.
Thank you, Board Member. Board Member Firestone.
I could maybe, I don't know if Andrew is available to talk about this, but I would like to just some clarification or maybe Joe, you all can, but in terms of, can you just explain more because I completely concur that we need to continue to refine and get those lists right. They're not perfect. And this is, as we switch to a funding use for this, as the funding criteria, we need to it's even more important to refine that correctly. So can you just speak to if there's a system, the way I read this language, there's a lot of flexibility to say a system either is failing or at risk, or can move to those if they, even if they aren't meeting, even if they aren't issued a violation. Can you just maybe clarify what is required when there is a community that seems like, you know, whether it's DFA identifies this because they've been working with a community forever, what is the process to necessary, or what would be required in order to get them put on a list? And what does that mean exactly?
Well, I think so. To start with, the failing list, I think, is a little more straightforward. And it's something that was very helpful when the board established those strategic goals for the SAFER program to focus on failing, because it also forces us to look at internally, how are we doing that, and are we doing that consistently? Like throughout the various DDW districts in terms of determining when there's a violation or compliance issue. So I think there's been significant, improvement in that. And again, it's like this feedback type of thing. Our DFA folks may identify something or TA, and then there's a communication with the district engineer, and then they go through the process of noticing the system that they have a violation, and once that's done, then they're on the failing list. So and Andrew or Kristen can speak to this a lot more in terms of course, the at-risk categorization incorporates a lot of different considerations and factors, some of which would be applicable to capital projects, some aren't. So where the methodology for identifying an at-risk system, because it's an aggregation of metrics, where it may categorize, say, a system as potentially at risk, but when you look at it, it has some infrastructure that is certainly at risk of failing. That would be a trigger for allowing us to fund that project by basically saying, irrespective of what the SAFER status is on the dashboard or anywhere else, this particular project is needed because there's a risk of failure, like some significant issue. Storage tank is leaking, may fail, whatever the case may be. So I think that gives us that kind of flexibility that we would look to. The other thing, we'll likely have more conversation around the fund expenditure plan when we talk about technical assistance, is we are looking as well at separating our capacity development technical assistance from our planning technical assistance. So the other thing that comes from looking at that SAFER status and evaluating that is that whole technical, managerial, financial capacity. So this isn't just about, funding projects, it's also about dealing with some of those other issues. And we are, proposing in further investments in technical assistance to support those at-risk systems where they may have other elements that are at risk. And that also includes, some of the examples we talked about, like with Lanier. There's fundamentally a governance issue there. So one answer may not necessarily be, a $20 or $30 million consolidation project. It may be to get the right governance structure. And, we also had that example like with San Lucas too. One of the options was a big, pipeline, but another option is getting an entity in there that has that technical, managerial, financial capacity. So we also want to have that flexibility as well as to identify a solution that looks like it's sustainable in the long term. And I don't know if Ed,
yeah, and just to clarify that one, I guess the question is, we have a very somewhat rigid methodology annually, because we have to decide what it is and apply it in the needs assessment to come up with these lists. But then there are examples where maybe that we're talking about here, where that kind of algorithm, those don't necessarily reflect what we all know is like reality. The system is at risk, for example, or the system is failing. are we in this proposal, or how are we dealing with when we get information and there's discussion about a system that isn't meeting the exact criteria that we have as indicators, but that there's agreement that it's at risk or failing?
We've had that happen over the last year a handful of times. And in those instances, we'll see the project, notice that they're not failing, but see the problem and go, well, that's definitely failing equivalent. And then we have funded the project and continue to move it forward, Andrew.
Does it go on the list, or
It-
does it not go on the list? It's just discretionary to fund, but
Yeah.
it's sort of considered at risk or failing by DFA, but not officially on a list.
Exactly. And we document it in our, in our agreements and in our paperwork that say we met with DDW. We agree that this is a failing equivalent system, or we can say at-risk equivalent if we adopt option 1, and we keep moving forward. Now, whether or not DDW wants to update their database, their dashboards to reflect that they can choose to do it, but it doesn't hold us back from keeping the project on track and moving forward.
Okay, I think that answered. So so that would be what the process would continue to be under option 1.
Yeah, but just expanded beyond what we've been doing this year to include now at-risk systems.
Yeah. I mean, and are we, I guess, considering, well, maybe I would just say, I think we want to get to a place where there's consistency across those two. And so I think to Board Member Morgan's point, because I do think this is a transition year, at some point we have to transition, whether either way, this year is transitioning, and we have to refine our methodologies here. So I think either way, I would like us to just think about how might we reconcile those two? Do we update the list as we see these, or how do we deal with that? Because I understand it's we're trying to be consistent and in the needs assessment and have a methodology that's sort of objective, but then we have this real life issues.
Yeah, if I might speak to that, Andrew Altavogt, Assistant Deputy Director with the Division of Drinking Water. In terms of updating the list or updating the methodologies, it's something that we've tried to do continuously throughout the program. And one of the issues is, first of all, just speaking to the failing criteria, 90% of our systems are failing because of primary or secondary MCL violations. And that really is the main driver of what gets folks on the failing list, with the other categories that were presented, sort of filling out the rest of that. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about is really the at-risk and the risk categories, and really our limitations there are on being able to have statewide data available and of good quality. And so that's why the risk categories are what they are. And I think Board Member Morgan, a lot of the examples you were pointing out are things that are related to technical, managerial, financial capability, or TMF, of water systems. And that's something where we just haven't had very good data statewide. We can get it, in for individual systems, but trying to do that statewide look at it is something that we haven't been able to do. We are now starting to work again on that, and we'll actually have TMF regulations that'll be coming to the board in a couple of years, but that's going to be a couple year process to get there. So that wouldn't be something we could do over the next year, and we're gonna have a public process and all kinds of work on that before it would come to the board. But I think that is a limitation of what we have, and so having the flexibility to work with individual systems, and that's something that we do on the Division of Drinking Water side, and certainly collaborating with our colleagues at DFA. That's what we have been doing and would continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Member. Appreciate those responses from staff. Vice Chair.
Well, I'll just give a few thoughts, and I just really appreciate the discussion, and Board Member Morgan, appreciate what you're proposing here. And I think that it seems that the struggle is wanting to be clear on the criteria, but not wanting to be so rigid, providing some degree of flexibility, so finding that sweet spot. And it just strikes me that on this, talking about it at this late stage of the game is what concerns me, because I don't recall, and maybe it's on my end, not picking up on it, but I don't recall much about this in briefings until most recently, the one we had this last week, and when we had a workshop. I don't remember this coming up. And so what I really am looking forward to is public comment, to the extent that we have any public commenters today on this, and spending more time on it, definitely spending more time and making sure that I'm looking at it not just from our perspective, but the perspective of the entities that are struggling, and they don't really care what the category is. They don't care what it's called. They don't care about, whether it's option A or option B or whatever it is. They know that they're having a challenge, and they just desperately want our assistance. And so I'm looking for the maximum amount of flexibility, but do understand at the same time it's important to signal to those that are wanting to apply how they can best apply, but not wanting multiple hoops. And I think what Board Member Morgan has identified here is wanting to get funding out, wanting to keep things flowing, but at the same time looking for that flexibility and not having additional hoops. And so to the extent that we can minimize that, that's what I'd be looking for.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Board Member Morgan.
Thank you. And thank you, Vice Chair. You have my remarks correct. There's some spot on there. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for summarizing them much more eloquently than I can. I just wanted to just add, part of my concern really is just the timing of this, and not really having the time to really discuss and to go through this. I briefly just brought it up quickly at the workshop, and really not being alerted to this earlier by staff. I know that we are under a tight time frame this year, and I know that we need to get moving and to have an adoption so that we can go and receive our federal grants. I want to keep this moving forward. I also want to make sure that we do have a robust public participation, as we always strive to have. This really did come to be a concern, because as we have been limiting, putting those, I'm going to say, tight guardrails on the funding, I do get phone calls from our applicants that say, hey, my project manager has told me I can't be funded because of X, that, I don't meet the criteria. And then, and I don't want to keep ending up, I don't want to be in the middle of all of those conversations, but the project managers read the IUP as, they read it very strictly. They're the first line of contact. They read it very black and white, strict. They're that first line of contact, and they reply back. It's not until it gets elevated that we start having additional conversations. And time is going by where they're getting told no, 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 no. And so that's, I'm hearing a slightly different response, and I'm happy about that than I did from the workshop previously. But again, it comes to what we put down on words, and how the project managers who are working directly with our applicants, how they're going to interpret the words that are down on paper. If they see that we're only doing it by what is on the safer list, they're going to go to that list. If it's on there, they're going to say yes. If it's not, they're going to say no. There's going to be pushback until it gets elevated, until we get to that point to where someone else can come in and say, okay, let's take these next steps. And so, my concern comes from those individuals calling and saying, I've been told no, that I'm no longer eligible, even if they have been working with the division for many years and moving their funding through. They're getting told no, they're no longer eligible. And that's a great concern, especially when it's a project that I feel that is clearly, you can see that there is a water quality concern. There's a concern for that community. And, after it does get elevated and you all do, those that are sitting here today, work with them, you agree, but they have been told no for quite a while and their project does get delayed. That is a real concern. So I want to make sure that we get the language right. I don't want to delay moving this through. I do want to make sure we get the language right and that we're sending the right communication. I wish that we had more time to really have this discussion and that we were able to work with you and we were able to work with our interested parties more to really have something today that was really well laid out. And as Board Member McGuire pointed out, that we're not asking you to come back again with the different language. That would have been my hope. But, here we sit today. And that's why, I'm looking at the second option. It's not the best option. By all means, it's not. I really want that additional flexibility because I am seeing delays in projects and I don't want to continue to see delays. We are really looking at moving projects forward as quickly as possible. So really I'm looking forward to, the public comment and, I not just speaking for, myself and what I see here, I'm, reacting to the phone calls that I receive and the comments that I receive from individual applicants.
Thank you, Board Member. I do appreciate your concerns. I know, the challenge certainly for each of us up here is that, we don't select the projects individually as board members. And we do our best to set criteria that kind of set our folks to make those decisions. So, one board member doesn't advocate for one project, another board member for another because people are coming to them. So appreciate you wanting to get to the policy heart of it. All right. Well, we do have 4 commenters, so we can hear from them. I think it might be helpful, and then we can see where the board is amongst the options. First person I'd like to call up is Willis Hahn, be followed by Nick Blair and Jennifer Capitolo, and our last commenter will be Eric Oriana.
All right. Hi, good morning, Chair Escobar.
Good morning.
My name is Willis Hahn with the Nossman Law Firm. I'm here again on behalf of the City of Los Banos. I participated last month with the IUP workshop, and we also submitted some written comments. As I previously mentioned, the city is dealing with significant challenges with hexavalent chromium that's naturally occurring and impacting all of the city's water supplies. Since the last time I talked at the workshop, the city has submitted the general application to the DW SRF program to start the process. And we're also able to meet yesterday with Mr. Downey as well as Lisa Hong and Maria Pang to talk about the program more specifically and how it relates to hexavalent chromium. So I really appreciate them taking the time to talk. As Mr. Downey mentioned earlier today, the revisions to the IUP have resolved the primary issues we raised in comments, specifically about the availability of grant funding for medium-sized systems on design and planning. I understand that those costs can be reimbursable later on as part of the construction grant agreement. It's helpful to clarify and we'll plan to proceed accordingly. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a brief update on where the city stands in terms of meeting the hexavalent chromium MCL. We've been working with the engineering firm Provost and Pritchard to develop a compliance plan in accordance with the MCL and are currently in the process of trying to get a short pilot test to determine the feasibility of potential treatment options on the impacted wells. For the current 25-26 fiscal year, the city plans to go through the environmental review process in their CEQA. They plan to prepare engineering reports based on the pilot study and further studies. They also are looking at conducting a rate study to increase the water rates in order to support this, irrespective of whether grant funding or loan funding is available. And they also plan to expend approximately half of the estimated design costs for the work. And so together during the current fiscal year, this is going to amount to approximately 2.2 million, to give you a sense of what that is. And again, the city will be bearing that and then rolling that into the construction grant agreement. And so from there, the following year, we expect to ramp up into the construction phase where the costs are really coming in. I think the last estimate I saw was about $65 million. And we'll be seeking a construction grant to SRF support there in order to get the necessary treatment in place and meet the MCL. And under the current timeline we're working with, we're looking at coming into compliance sometime in late 2028. And so that's hopefully going to be laid out in the compliance plan we plan to submit shortly to the State Water Board in the next few weeks. And looking to continue engaging with you all, your staff, both on the DDW side of the house as well as DFA, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Appreciate your engagement here, the update, and your advocacy here for Los Banos. Much appreciated. Next, I'd like to call up Nick Blair, be followed by Jennifer Capitolo, and then Eric Coriana.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, board members. Nick Blair, Senior Policy Advocate with the Association of California Water Agencies, aka ACWA. We represent over 470 public local water agencies that support water for domestic, agricultural, and industrial uses to over 90% of California's population. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today on the SRF IUP. And as always, thank you to staff. We had 2 calls from them last week to talk this over ahead of the public comment period today. I would say, we can hear the different perspectives brought in offering options 1 and 2, speaks to the various interests that rely on the drinking water SRF. We will say we are in August at this point. Staff has put a lot of extra time in this year as a result of the policy amendment process and is working now to encumber federal funds and reduce the number of projects that'll roll over to next year. We are only a few months away from DFA beginning the process to review applications for 26, 27. Utilizing administrative resources to go back and re-examine all applications under a new set of criteria right now might be challenging. So we can appreciate the intent of option 2 to avoid unintended consequences as talked about today. So perhaps following board discussion, it would be prudent to look to option 1 today and resolve to further explore the intent of option 2 in next year's IUP when there's more time to further dive into this. To include more projects for grant and principal forgiveness. And we can lean into the SRF advisory group to further explore this opportunity. I think Member McGuire mentioned that as an option, so maybe we can lean into that. We look forward to working with the board on SRF in this case and in future situations. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Next is Jennifer Capitolo with California Water Association. Good morning.
Good morning, board members. Very insightful conversation today, listening here. And I had drafted some comments, and I feel like there's other things that I'd love to say today. But Dawn White, you all might know her from Golden State Water Company. She manages a lot for the California Water Association, our engagement with the SRF program and Division of Financial Assistance and SAFER. And she was hoping to be here today to make comments, but she got called into jury duty. So I'm hoping to fill in as best as I can today. But we want to thank you again for the opportunity to comment today. We appreciate, what you're trying to accomplish here. Also, what we're trying to accomplish here is safe, affordable drinking water for everyone. Turning to the resolutions for a moment, we do support I guess we're calling it option 1 of the resolutions that were put forward. But we do have some interest in what I think board member Morgan was trying to outline potentially in option 2. So Dawn White asked that I share a couple of examples with you today. And I think it really aligns with what you were talking about today. One of them is an example focused on what we'll call miscategorization, right? And we have had really excellent conversations with staff about how we can change some of those categorizations to still meet the needs of those drinking water systems. And the second is a little bit harder to accomplish with what you all are discussing today. So I'll just share those examples really quickly. The first is called Foster Road. It's a mutual water company in Santa Barbara County, and it is very much on the verge of failing, but it is, we'll say, miscategorized as not at risk. The mutual water company does not have a board of directors right now. They have a volunteer that is helping run it. They are very much interested in consolidating with Golden State Water Company. A couple of months ago, their pump went out and they were without water for a couple of days. Golden State provided a temporary connection for them, and they reopened the pump and repaired the well, but they don't have money to even pay for those improvements that are there to be made. So again, Golden State's working to acquire the system, but they're concerned that funding might not be available for the system because it is categorized as not at risk. And their biggest concerns there are more governance, which isn't really captured as much in the SAFER TMF needs assessment analysis. So that's one of the systems. The other one is South Shore, which is formerly called Crescent Bay in Lake County. I'm not sure if any of you have been out to tour, but it's an excellent tour if you ever get the chance to go out there. I've taken some folks out. That consolidation has been completed. So it is now owned and operated by Golden State Water Company. It has been out of compliance for a very, very long time. There is technical assistance and planning work going into that system, and there is a potential for a longer term solution there. So it is still currently out of compliance. There is this opportunity to make a short-term improvement, not a long-term improvement. But we've been told by folks, not just State Water Board staff, but also other partners that are working with us on technical assistance, don't make that improvement because you will jeopardize future funding for the permanent solution. And that shouldn't be something any of us ever have to be stuck in that situation where we can't provide a temporary solution to bring safe, clean drinking water with fear of not being able to, get that long-term funding available. So I don't know what the solution is to that problem. In our SAFER letter, which I think you'll hear in another couple board meetings, we did say maybe there's a point in time where you could freeze the project and, they were out of compliance at that moment in time, and we use that moment in time as their eligibility for grants instead of where they're currently at as we move forward, or we have some kind of agreement that there's temporary solutions that we could put into place without jeopardizing funding. But we would see some benefit to expanding what was in this option 2 resolution to look at these types of systems. It could potentially solve this problem, that you could have more flexibility and not having to have everything fall under very strict categorization. So that's something, if you all want to move forward and keep talking about that. I also, like Nick, am on the Drinking Water SRF State Advisory Committee. So if that's a place where we have that conversation, happy to have that, or the staff are always open and willing to talk to us about it, but wanted to share that perspective with you as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Capitolo. Really appreciate those examples and the engagement on this. And as you said, we're doing our best to try to balance what is just a lot of need, as we know, and not an abundant amount of resource when it comes to the amount of need. And just thanks. I appreciate those specific examples. I think they help us here as we continue to have our discussion. And agree that we should leverage the advisory committee to be helping us unpack some of this. All right. I believe our last commenter here is Eric Oriana. Mr. Oriana.
Good morning, Chairman, board members, and staff. My name is Eric Oriana. I'm here on behalf of Community Water Center. Wanted to share a number of comments in response to the draft IUP, and wanted to first start off by appreciating staff for the changes that they've made so far to the plan. And I'll just name a few of those. One of the things that we had asked for is to exclude TA costs to be included in the total cost per connection. And so we appreciate that. Some of those solutions are for the communities that have the biggest need. And so would it be right to penalize those types of communities? We also appreciate how the proposed safer failing or at-risk prioritization includes that prioritization for at-risk communities. And then wanted to also share that we appreciate the response from DFA staff to be flexible in regards to systems that might be a failing equivalent system. And so with that said, we will be supporting option one for adoption today. And I think one of the reasons we're supporting that is we saw a good increase in the project caps that were proposed. And we were happy to see that. And I think for the communities that we work with, rural communities, the higher cost per connection or total project costs is a big burden for a lot of these communities. And so that increase is significant for some of the projects that Community Water Center is working on. There are still a number of projects that do not meet the total project caps or cost per connections. And I think in the current scale that's listed there's some project that for some of those projects, there's like an inadvertent cost per connection of as high as 200,000, some as low as 120 or 90,000. And so we recognize it's hard to get it just right, but I think what it does is it recognizes the need for projects that maybe cost a little bit more. And in our example, in some of the communities that we are organizing in, some communities have contamination that's so high that a point of use or point of entry system is not a viable alternative. And so we just asked the board to continue to be open to those types of projects. In our letter, we flagged the need to consider things outside of just cost efficiency for the idealness of a project. And so we're asked that you all consider things like environmental justice, racial equity, and things of that nature. And so both option 1 and 2 didn't address that necessarily, but I think we want to continue to work through that and just are in favor of adopting option 1 today. With that said, again, just appreciate the impact that this program has had. Community Water Center and other partners were at the state capitol yesterday advocating for reauthorization of the cap and trade dollars to protect safer funding. And, a lot of the projects that will be funded through the SRF will be funded because of the SAFER program and how the state has leveraged TA. And so we just want to call special attention to the great work that SAFER program and SRF program are doing in tandem. And with that said, I was asked by Leadership Council to support also option 1 in terms of the proposals before the board today. With that, I hear from folks who are interested in continuing conversation of at-risk and failing determinations within a needs assessment. And as the chair of the stakeholder advisory group, we're sure happy to continue those conversations. Thank you for the opportunity to comment and appreciate just the work from everybody and the robust discussion that was had today. Thank you.
Much appreciation, Mr. Oriana, for your leadership, continued advocacy, and engagement on this. Thanks for the acknowledgement, and appreciate our folks. Again, when you look at the responsiveness, the desire here to balance and get this right, it's because of all the engagement we have from everyone and board members here. So it's just really appreciated. So thank you. All right, that wraps up our commenters and leaves us here with still some discussion, I think, at the dais. If I can go to Vice Chair and then I'll go to Board Member Firestone. Okay, yeah. Board Member Firestone, if you wanted to follow up on Mr. Oriana's comment.
Did you want to follow up on his comment?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. So just on the comment on caps, because we haven't talked about that as much yet on the dais. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you. I really support the change sheet 2, and appreciate staff digging into project caps. I know a lot of the environmental justice groups have been raising concerns for a while now, and as well as other TA providers on per connection caps, and that staff have been trying to help us balance the limited funding that we have and the reality that a lot of times communities that have historically been underinvested in, those projects are going to cost more. And so we're trying to balance both of those things. I think where we're landing here looks is good with the change sheet 2. I think I really just, and I also appreciate the changes to the, removing the TA costs and other things that, again, I think reflect this, a lot of the racial equity resolution intents of just how are we making sure that we're supporting people to address, historical underinvestments and ensure everyone can access safe drinking water. I really just wanted to flag because I know Mr. Oriana lifted up some of the comments and potential, particularly domestic well communities. I think that as we move forward, there are going to be, we've seen this with some of the Chrome 6 communities as well. There are particular communities that have really high costs. So we heard from Los Banos, and I know Coachella are sort of examples of things that have been coming in on Chrome 6. I know there are some domestic well projects out there that have really high costs. We also had done that. We approved higher costs for some projects with the Coachella Valley Water District, years ago to address lots, sort of a backbone of systems. I think just as we move forward, I'd just like us to continue to look at and evaluate, how are these costs changing? How are we seeing, how are we balancing keeping reasonable cost caps, but also being able to address the, some extreme circumstances where there aren't other feasible alternatives, and the only alternatives for a community are over a cost cap. In those cases, you've brought stuff to the board. I think, to me, the guiding factor is, have we really, if things are really expensive, have we really helped the community explore every feasible option? And have we helped identify, an option that's feasible? But where there really is no other option, I don't think it's appropriate to sort of walk away entirely. And I would want us to work with them to figure out, is there an exception that's needed? Because there really aren't other ways of that community having access to safe drinking water. And that's the whole idea with the human right to water. So I wanted to just flag that. I believe that's how DFA has been dealing with this. I think we do need to set expectations, and I like where we're ending at, but I wanted to speak a little bit to the per cap, or the cap on per connections. Thanks.
You board member, Vice Chair.
So I just have a question on process and also a suggestion. So the discussion has been really helpful on this issue of, I think that Ms. Capillo explained it best or termed it best, sort of this miscategorization that, potentially can occur with a system that might be overly rigid and where there may not be enough flexibility. So I think we're all looking for the same thing here. On balance, I support Board Member Morgan, but I also am kind of reading the room, and it seems that option 1 is, definitely in play as well. But I think option 1 would need to be fixed, to make sure that it incorporates our intention to continue the dialogue. So I agree, Board Member McGuire, and Mr. Lawfer and I actually had a conversation just before the meeting, and I asked him to put together some language. So I think just getting that out there would be helpful as well, but also a question on process when we have 2 options, how would we be going forward on, looking at both of them at the same time, or we're just waiting for a motion?
Certainly, the board can begin a conversation without any motion on the table. But when there is a motion, the moving board member will need to indicate which of the preferred options. And then the motion will, of course, need to include change sheet 2, regardless of which option is part of the primary motion. And just one thing, listening to the dialogue today before I put up the language of a potential additional resolved clause to add to option one that would address really what I've heard from all the board members, but as stated very plainly by Board Member McGuire, is the idea of having a framing for ongoing dialogue on this specific issue as the safer criteria are aligned into the drinking water IUP, drinking water SRF IUP. And, I think Member Morgan was very clear that, ultimately she thinks it makes sense for them to be aligned. It's just how do we get there, and some dissatisfaction with how we got to this current version of the document. But another thing that I heard that I think would be important to incorporate into any motion is, a recognition that the criteria are in the document. There is some rigidity in them, but there is also some flexibility. And I think Member Morgan, eloquently stated the importance, and this is not to impugn anyone in DFA, but the importance of really exercising project management and being willing to flex the discretion that's already in there and elevate up to senior management in the Division of Financial Assistance to ensure that those projects that may not, capture or be captured expressly within the criteria, there are other mechanisms for ultimately getting them funding. And you heard that from both the deputy director and the assistant deputy director for the division. So, any motion to just sort of plus that up and underscore the importance that the Division of Financial Assistance use the discretion that's already contained within the drinking water SRF IUP and within the drinking water SRF policy to ensure that those kinds of systems don't fall through the crack, I think would be an important part of a motion. So in terms of language, and hopefully I can get it up on the screen here for you, this would be a new resolved clause that could be added as resolved 5 in option 1 if the board were to go that way. And I encourage a more complete discussion amongst the board members because I do sense that there's still room to go with option 1 or 2. New resolved 5 would read, recognizes this is the first year of the board's shift in alignment of the DWSRF IUP priority categories to criteria developed in the SAFER program, and directs staff to work with the DWSRF advisory group, SAFER program, water systems, technical assistance providers, environmental justice groups, and affected communities to gauge the appropriateness of the criteria and to propose any necessary adjustments before the next DWSRF IUP is presented to the board for consideration, period. And I know that there were multiple commenters that identified the Drinking Water SRF Advisory Committee and Group expressly. This language is intentionally broad to recognize that we want to make sure that there is a comprehensive dialogue with affected communities.
Thank you, Mr. Loffer. I appreciate that. I'm looking to Board Member Morgan.
Thank you. I appreciate this language, Vice Chair, and the resolve. I do, and I probably should have said something earlier. I do want to actually address one of Mr. Blair's comments also of that the option 2 would, in effect, have DFA recategorize projects or rescore projects, and just want to clarify that it would not. The options are actually pretty much is exactly the same. Option 2 just is making it explicit that there is more flexibility within DFA. And so just want to clarify that piece. There was, I believe, just there is some, I don't want to say confusion, but just some perhaps misunderstanding, and the additional language which Mr. Fung did point out within the resolution was clarifying that the two were aligned, and the slides that were presented was looking at the comparison of 2 years ago's IUP and was not reflective of option 2. And so I appreciate and I like the resolution and the additional language. My concern is remaining with what is actually in the language within the IUP and how line staff interpret. They're not going to go back and look at the resolution. They're going to interpret the actual language within the IUP. So I'm in favor of the additional language. I would also look at some changes in the actual IUP to make sure that line staff are not a barrier to slow and are not a barrier to funding and are not unintentionally slowing down viable projects.
Just to clarify, board members, option number 2 would require DFA to bring an amended IUP back to the board. And the amended language would not take effect until the amendment is adopted. Thank you.
Board Member Firestone.
Thanks. So I think that I think we're all trying to get to the same thing here. I think that we've raised a couple, well, especially Board Member Morgan, I think you've helped raise a number of important issues. And I will say to the Vice Chair, like this was brought up by both Board Member Morgan and I at the last workshop. So this isn't a brand new issue. This is something that was brought up at the last workshop. And I think we asked staff to analyze, and they did analyze and brought us some information. But obviously we haven't had enough time to work through it. And so that's why we're dealing with this together at this point. So it seems to me that there's two things that concrete. So I would prefer not to have to go back through the adoption process if we can address the substantive concerns. The two things that I'm gleaning from this are, one, what Board Member Morgan, you just said, and I wonder if we could give, whether it's in board direction and adoption or in the resolution. But if we could give direction to staff, one, to DFA staff to just flag for all DFA staff, line staff, everyone, that they should be looking at potential for failing or at-risk equivalencies and facilitate efficient consultation to resolve that. So if we can give direction that is something that that staff should be directing staff to examine, and give that guidance with, ask them to give that guidance to department staff with the IUP. And so maybe we could include that also in the resolution, or we just give, I don't know, General Counsel, our Chief Counsel may have some thoughts on that. And then the other piece, in addition, that I think is the other side of the coin on that, which was also brought up at the last workshop, and through this process or this discussion, is I also think on the DDW side, we need to look at how we better incorporate the failing and at-risk equivalencies into our lists, and how we can, I think in particular, the at-risk list is one where we haven't developed those indicators with the funding guidelines in mind. And so in particular, maybe one of the examples that Capitolo mentioned, but if you've got a system that is high risk for only one indicator, I don't know that necessarily puts it at high risk in the needs assessment. And it may be that it is appropriate to have that at high risk. And so I think we're gonna, if we can give some direction, maybe both or within the resolution, or at least, from the dais, for those two things around guidance to staff, and that's really around implementation over the next year. I don't know if those, I'm interested in other board members, if those are the sort of substantive, if those address the substantive concerns, or if there's other ones that that doesn't address.
And while you all are digesting what Member Firestone has just put out on the floor, I am sensitive to the issue that Member Morgan raised about, staff reading documents. Given the late date, a little concerned about trying to make sure we capture where the right places in the document would be. But I think the direction or the concern that she's raised could potentially be addressed by simply in the motion, providing direction to the Deputy Director for the Division of Financial Assistance to issue a written memorandum or directive to staff that highlights where that flexibility is and the need to elevate to the Deputy Director those systems that are at risk of, not to use that risk inappropriately here, but at risk of not properly being funded or that discretion properly being used. And essentially that then becomes supervisorial advice or direction from the division management to the program staff. I think that it doesn't fully get to the concern that Member Morgan has, but I think it is a management approach to address it and helps the board move forward today on this important process.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Mr. Lawfer. And looking to Board Member Morgan, if that
Yes,
addresses some of the concern.
that is helpful. And I want to just want to respond to part of Board Member Firestone's comments. Want to make sure that this authority lies within the Division of Financial Assistance to continue to move forward. They do not need the okay from the Division of Drinking Water prior to moving forward. And so that they have the authority themselves to make a technical decision to move forward, that a project it appears that it is at risk and that they can continue to move forward on funding. And while also to consult DDW. So it's not taking DW out, it's concurrent. And so not that, because the way I was interpreting the comment was that you go to DDW first and then you continue with the funding. And so I want to make sure that that is not what's occurring, because I know DDW's workload is also large, and I don't want to continue to have unnecessary, what I view as unnecessary delay, that we are concurrently working on moving that project forward while also working with your counterparts in DDW. Because there are times where something may come in and you can clearly see that, yes, this is an equivalent project. It's very clear that this is failing, that this here is at risk, and we're going to go ahead and move through with funding. And then we're also going to work with our counterparts to have it assessed on their end to see, does it fall into the equivalency, or does it perhaps go ahead and hit the list? And so I just want to make sure that we're moving projects forward and not further delaying them.
Yeah, thanks, Board Member Morgan. So I believe Ms. Fung had a recommendation where we could make a limited edit to the IUP, and so along the lines of what you're saying. So we still, just as a matter of routine, it's part of our procedures. We consult with DDW and the LPA, but we can, I think, eliminate a phrase there that might suggest that there needs to be sort of a sequencing to that. So, Ms. Fung, did you have that language?
Yeah, I can describe the language. The existing footnote 23 in the IUP says the deputy director has discretion to fund projects that are not failing or at risk. So I'm not reading the language, I'm describing because it's hard to understand. And it says, if after consultation with DDW or the local primacy agency, the deputy director determines the project will address a risk of failure. So language for consideration would be to remove the if after consultation with the DDW or local primacy agency. But in order to put some guide rails on what types of projects can be funded, an option is also to add, and the project would have been eligible under the project categories, system size, community type, and water rates criteria in appendices D and E of the 2023-24 DWSRF IUP. I can send the language over to Mr. Laufer if it's helpful to look at it on the screen and debate. I mean, there are pros and cons. You may want to talk about.
Yeah, my recommendation would be if the concern is regarding the consultation with the DDW and the LPA, we can, I don't think that language necessarily said I needed concurrence or anything like that. So I think it's fine to keep it there, but if you have a concern that it's there, we could remove that particular language. But overall, I agree with what Board Member Morgan was indicating in terms of making sure that any discussion or consultation with DDW or local primacy agency doesn't slow things down. That yes, there are going to be cases where it's clear that a project is equivalent, there's sort of the failing equivalency, or it is clearly at risk, and we should proceed expeditiously. And I appreciate Mr. Laufer's suggestion. I think that'll be very helpful to clarify board expectations, my expectations and direction as well. Because ultimately, again, the board, the delegation you're providing is to me, and then in some cases to my assistant deputy directors through me. So we do want to make that as clear as possible, like where there is some of this discretion, how do we expect it to be applied? And to Ms. Morgan's point, to ensure that staff understand that there is a process to quickly elevate, that they don't have to necessarily get stuck with what the literal words in the IUP are, that there are these opportunities to apply judgment, and the board has provided for that.
And thank you. That's helpful. My only question, I don't 100% recall what's in the fiscal year 23-24 IUP, so I'm not sure how restrictive or not that is.
Yeah, I would not recommend we reference that. I don't think that part's
was
necessary.
the language that was read, so I just wanted to.
Yeah. I believe, and again, I think the phrase in that footnote that's referring to consultation with DDW and the LPA, the way I interpret that is more of a procedural, making sure we do what we kind of normally do and not necessarily receive concurrence before moving forward. Because the way that's written, it's still, it's a funding decision, so the discretion is with me as deputy director as to whether to fund that project, whether it's consistent with the IUP and any discretion the board's provided.
Thank you for that,
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Kurkowski.
It would be nice to see the language. I was just going off of what was read, and just want to make sure that I was understanding what was being proposed.
So what I'm putting up right now is what you see at the top was simply the Resolve 5 that I read in earlier, the potential Resolve 5 that could be part of a motion. What I'm hearing from Deputy Director Karkowski would just be capturing the first part of what Ms. Fong had read into the record, and that is, this is on footnote 23 on page 38 of the Drinking Water SRF IUP that's attached to this agenda item. And essentially, it would just strike that subordinate clause of if after consultation with DDW or local primacy agency, and it just would read with those revisions, the Deputy Director of DFA will have flexibility to fund such projects if the Deputy Director determines the project will address a risk of failure. And so the highlighted and stricken text was the language that Ms. Fung read into the record and that Mr. Karkowski supports.
Much appreciated. I think, between the additional resolution language and this adjustment to the footnote, it may capture, I think, largely a lot of the concern that we were hearing, but wanting to check in with Board Member Morgan to see how that feels.
Yes, that this is getting us there. I'm just wondering if we want to say determines the project will address a because I'm just thinking because it's filling or an at-risk system. Um, and so, but I'm also, so, yeah, and so I'm just wondering if that fully captures it. If risk of failure fully captures a failing or at risk.
The way that I interpret that and sort of the IUP as a whole is that, yes, the intention of the board is that we prioritize systems that are clearly listed as failing or at-risk systems based on safer status, and that the project has to have a nexus to addressing that failure or risk factor, and that this provision provides the flexibility to fund projects that otherwise wouldn't be fundable because of the safer status is not properly categorized. So yes, I interpret that as it allows us to fund those projects because it's either failing or it's at risk of failing, and the project will address that issue, that particular issue. So I think that provides that discretion. That's the way I interpret that.
Yeah, and as counsel, I would also concur that, a plain reading of that is it embraces both concepts of failure and at risk of failure. So I think that's the concern you were getting at, Member Morgan.
It is. I can read it that way. I'm trying to read it as someone else besides me.
I think we will, your staff and all the board understands what the intent of it is, and I think it is sufficiently clear if it's adopted ultimately in this form.
Yeah, and I think importantly, and again, there can be some additional direction given as the motion is made, but we'll be checking in on this discussion as we come into next year's IUP for sure, and think that we'll hopefully have additional information. We'll understand when the discretion was used, et cetera. But a report back will be important. But I think that's implicit in all of this because I don't think our interest in it is going away into next year.
Just a quick comment. This footnote appears twice, once in the planning table and once in the construction table. So it's footnote 23 on page 35 and also footnote 29 on page 38. So if we're going that way, mention both.
Thank you for that, Ms. Fung.
So, and I fully agree with the intent here, but I do think it's important to say they should consult with DDW, and I don't think this is saying that. What I think we heard was DDW is not required to act or make a determination before DFA, so many acronyms, can move. So I want to address the concerns that I think your, board member Morgan's raising. But I don't know that this is solving a problem in terms of erasing the reference to consultation with DDW. And I just think that the intent here needs to be to work together to align our funding and safer and needs assessment programs as efficiently as possible without delay. And I think already DFA has, this footnote doesn't prevent DFA from doing that at their own discretion or require DDW to act in any way. But I think if we can give direction, like was suggested to DFA, to the deputy director to provide direction to staff to flag that they should be looking for the potential for failing and at-risk system equivalent systems and facilitate that efficient work, that would, I'm not going to battle on this one if it's really makes a big difference to other board members, but I don't know that it's sending the right message to delete the consultation with DDW and LPAs.
Yeah, I think the expectation is that consultation would still go on. I think Mr. Kurkowski said as much, and the concern hearing from the other board member is that it actually be a delay because, consultation or multiple meetings need to happen, I suppose, before DFA can make a determination. Again, and
But
here,
yeah.
this is all, getting into, a lot of
Management.
detail.
Yes, exactly.
so-
And I
and
feel
that's
like
why-
management by the division, the deputy director could provide the management needed, and we don't need to wordsmith it.
If I can clarify, so the consultation and the coordination has historically always occurred without it being in writing here. And so that's why I don't feel the need to put it in writing. Putting it in writing here raised a red flag because it says if after consultation with DDW or the LPA. And so that is putting direction that they have to do this. And if after it, then that's putting it in sequential order that they have to go there and then they can make their decisions. Historically, they have always been done concurrently and kept things moving forward. And so I didn't feel that this footnote was necessary. This is something that has historically always been done. It is part of the management of DFA. And so this here was giving new direction to staff that delays projects.
Other board colleagues, thoughts?
Yeah, it is a complicated balancing. We don't want to hold up projects. We want them to move forward as quickly as possible. I concur with Board Member Firestone. I think this is, and you, actually, Board Member Morgan as well, because I think, again, we're all saying the same thing, which is that this is an important step. It happens anyway. And it's something that the deputy director is going to do regardless in making that call. And I mean by that, consulting with DGW or the LPA in making that decision. I think that's really important input in figuring out where does a project fall in that equivalency test, if you will. So I can go either way. I don't really see a need to delete the language, frankly, because I think it's an important step. I hear you. We don't want to hold up projects. And I think that's where maybe that memo or that direction to staff could really be helpful in providing that guidance and just making it very clear that that's our expectation.
All right. How are we feeling on, at this point, option one with the new resolved clause in the resolution? And I think what's still somewhat up in the air is how we're feeling about the footnote, which, again, I can go either way as well, actually.
I just asked for
Yes, Board Member
feedback. Sorry.
Firestone.
So I think what I'm hearing is I just want to make sure I'm hearing feedback from other board members on, can we give direction to the deputy director to provide guidance to staff on implementing this in terms of looking for, potential for failing net risk equivalency and facilitating efficient use. I think if he's providing that, then I don't have, if it's really important to you to delete that footnote, or not the whole footnote, the language in the footnote, but the guidance can help reinforce that the consultation should take place, like that's fine. I defer to I think we're making clear the intent. And so if we can get to, but I do want to what I'd like clarity from other board members on is, as part of our motion, rather than doing wordsmithing all the resolutions, as part of our motion, can we do what, not to say that we're not changing this. I'm just saying, in addition to whatever changes, are we giving direction in the motion to direct the deputy director to provide some guidance to staff on looking for equivalency, moving projects forward efficiently in consultation with DDW? And then are we also, because I know this is on DFA, but because it's so wrapped up in this, are we also looking to give guidance to DDW to be working on evaluating our at-risk and failing lists to continue to better align with our funding program, these sort of equivalency and funding program needs. Is that appropriate, or that we just haven't had discussion
I thought that would be something of a logical outgrowth from the new resolution and the direction to be working with groups. I mean, it is a component of all of this discussion, the miscategorization. And so I think it's broad enough that the resolution at this point should capture that. Because they're going to come back to us next year. So as part of that, I think is implicit some
Okay.
of these issues.
So,
because it's appropriateness of criteria and adjustments. Not necessarily even to the criteria, it could be to.
not to the IUP, because I think what I'm talking about is right outside of the IUP.
About the SAFER program and ultimately the needs
the
assessment.
needs assessment. Yeah.
Which, again, I mean, we're not going to direct work through the IUP for the SAFER program. That's more for
Exactly.
the fund expenditure plan.
Yep.
But I think,
Okay.
it's in the universe still. I think it's somewhat captured there, but.
Well, if I may, Chair
Please.
Esquivel, I mean, the way I would
means
characterize it, I would be reluctant, given the scope of this resolution and, the staff at the table and the commenters at the table to provide direction to the SAFER program. But the reality is, as soon as the DFA staff begin working on alignment and questions come up, and obviously some of the issues have been daylighted here in terms of concerns about those criteria, your staff are going to be doing it anyway to make sure that SAFER's at the table, that Andrew and his folks, or Mr. Altfalt and his folks, are carefully considering, and they have all heard the desire for the alignment. So I prefer not that we add anything express in the resolution about that.
So, okay, and maybe staff can keep this in mind for when you bring when we consider the FEP, if in a resolution, maybe it's useful to, in that flag, continued work on indicators and needs assessment and lists to align with funding programs. Okay. I mean, with that, I think with all that discussion, and if we're providing just the direction that we discussed, then I'm fine with I think I'm comfortable with option 1 with change sheet 2 and what has been put up on the screen in terms of these changes, but
And then verbal direction around guidance for staff.
Yes.
I think, and
Okay.
that should, I think,
Okay.
encapsulate everything. All right, how does that feel, Board Member Morgan?
Okay, so I want to thank everyone for bearing with me today. So with the great discussion, thank you to my fellow board members for hanging in there. Thank you to staff and all of our interested parties. So with that, I will make a motion for option 1 with the with amendment 2, new result, change sheet 2. Are the new resolve 5 as read into the record, and amendments to footnote 23 and footnote 29 also as read into the record. And direction to staff, to Mr. Kalkowski, to have a memo to staff providing direction as provided by the board today.
Thank you, Board Member.
Thanks. And the only clarification I would provide is there was a discrepancy on page numbers between what Ms. Fung read into the record or referenced and what I referenced. And I think the difference is the red line. The pages up here should correspond to the red line that's attached to the resolution and posted on the board's website But ultimately, those changes will be made in the final document if the board's motion or if Ms. Morgan's motion passes.
Thank you for dotting that I. Appreciate it, Mr. Laufer. Let's see if we have a second.
I'll second. Thank you.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member Morgan,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
and Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The vote is unanimous and the resolution is adopted. Thank you, everyone, for the very robust discussion today. Thank you all for your contributions here and to that discussion as well. As we said, we postponed on the fund expenditure plan. We'll bring that to a coming board meeting here soon, an important complement to this intended use plan. All right, thank you, everyone. That wraps up item number 2. Was it Yes, and brings us at item number 4, our board member reports. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if they have anything off the bat they would like to make sure and report.
I can go. I only have one item to report, but well, at least for me, it was super fun. I had a great day down in San Bernardino County on August 13th. Just talking to them about the wastewater needs assessment and septic to sewer projects. They have 2 that they have started. They're working with our staff. And just there's a lot of work being done in the county. It is a very large county, as we all know, and there are a lot of septic systems within the county. I mean, just really many of the streets that you drive down, one side is sewer and the other side is not. So we drove we didn't drive the whole county. That would have taken a long time. But we spent a day driving and just looking at the communities and just looking at, just as I described, that, hey, we're looking at this part here is sewer, this part here is not, and just what their desire to connect those areas that are not sewer to their sewers, and some of their challenges of where you have, the city and then the other side of the street is the county. And we had city representatives and county representatives all there together and just discussing how they have come together to work on just meeting what I'll refer to as the human right to sanitation, just really meeting that need and how they see this as one of their largest challenges within the county. So great discussion. I did let them know about our wastewater needs assessment, ask them to please, since they have their list of they've been working on this for a few years now, to please send us their lists of all of their unsewered areas, so that we would have that within our assessment and to get plugged in to our efforts here. So they were really excited to hear about the work that the Water Board is doing. They promised me that they're going to get plugged in. They're going to get that list on over. So I am hopeful that we will hear from them soon. If we do not, I will be reaching out to them to remind them that, we really do want to hear from them and to work with them through our wastewater needs assessment.
Fantastic. Thank you, board member. Thank you for connecting with folks on just the critical sanitation needs out there. It's really appreciated. Vice Chair.
Okay, on August 8th, I attended a ribbon cutting at the Pajaro Valley's College Lake Water Supply Project. And it was just a great day to be there to celebrate reduced groundwater use and this new project, which includes improvements for fish passage. It's just a win-win all the way around. And it was a great history lesson because they had a board member that had been involved in this and other projects for decades, and Senator Laird was there. And of course, he was involved in some important management actions in that region since he was on the city council. And so I learned a lot that day, and it was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Always a lot to learn from Senator Laird. Really appreciate that, Vice Chair. I have no reports. I was on vacation for most of the last 2 weeks and just really enjoyed my time with family, sister, nephew, husband. So just thanks for that.
All right. On August 6th, I went down to Carmel and attended the San Clemente Dam removal 10th anniversary celebration. I just thought it was really, really important to reflect on what at the time was the largest dam removal of its kind, freeing up miles of the Carmel River for access to the fisheries, and just really celebrating that effort, and also just also reflecting on the fact that it was an investor-owned utility. It was California American Water that ultimately stepped up to the plate to participate in that, working with fishery agencies and the local community there. So it was a real milestone at the time. I wasn't involved with the project at all. So for me, it was a good opportunity actually to go down, meet a lot of the folks who were involved, and learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, great project, great area. Appreciate it, board member. Board member Firestone.
I just was going to mention that I didn't participate. I watched in person on the ag expert panel that started up, and we've had our first 2 days of that meeting, and it's a really impressive group. I thought very robust presentations, all trying to help us grapple with where we are on data and thinking about nitrogen limits, targets, metrics. So I think this is really timely, and I'm really excited about this process to help us dig in. I think it's going to be a really challenging assignment that we have for our Ag Expert panel, but we have the right people, I think, if anyone can do it. And I appreciate our staff and the regional boards and stakeholders all trying to offer all the assistance we can to help that be successful. So I'm looking forward. I think the next one's in the end of October, and then in January. Is that right? So, and I think we'll talk more, but would love to, I think, figuring out how we stay abreast of the discussion, well, because we can't all attend all of them, and it'd be good to continue to get some update on kind of where things are. One of the really interesting things was just getting an overview from each of the, not every region, but many of the regions on where they are, and they're all in such different places and also have such a different approach, even though they're all trying to implement our precedential order. And that was also educational. So appreciate that.
Can I offer a little extra on
Yes,
that?
please.
Just since you mentioned the additional meetings, the panel will be meeting formally on October 31st and then again on January 14th. We've also scheduled listening sessions that some of the panel members will be attending in between. I don't know all of the dates. I know there's one on October 1st in between the panel meetings to listen to concerns and get more information in between meetings to the panel. So just wanted to mention that as well.
Appreciate that, Ms. Mogus. Yeah, it is one of the critical projects before the board right now, and a really important discussion. And so there will definitely be a lot more follow-up with the board and a lot more update as to how that's going. And my hope is certainly that folks do kind of put aside talking points and really come to the table to try to come to some consensus, as opposed to kind of predetermined kind of sets of perspectives, which is always fine too. We have that, but really looking forward to the process, I think, more to help bring folks together. Vice Chair.
This is just reminding me of a conversation that Board Member Firestone and I had because I followed both days in part just online, and was really interested to hear Region 3 and Region 5's presentation. And we were just talking about how much we learned through that process. And since CV Salts comes to us once a year, I know we've got the Executive Director's Report where we can always tune in on what's going on locally, but it's always nice when you hear from people directly. And so we were just sort of brainstorming that maybe maybe it'd be helpful to have a periodic information item, and maybe pairing it when we have CV Salts anyway, kind of an irrigated lands day where we hear from the regions on any updates that they might have. Just a thought.
Yeah, really appreciate that thought. Thank you, Vice Chair. All right. Hearing nothing further on board member reports brings us to the end of our board meeting. We will not have closed session, so this adjourns our meeting. We will next meet on September 3rd, and so until then, hope everyone's having a good summer, a good August. We'll see you in about 2 weeks. Be safe, be well. Thank you for the good discussion today. Thanks all.